translates to 2.25 million jobless Filipinos.
With higher food prices exerting upward pressure.
Already above the government's own
taon na pork sa panukalang budget para sa susunod na taon.
$15 billion on anti-flooding infrastructure.
An impeachment complaint against President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. filed and endorsed.
Please welcome our host and facilitator, Miss Audrey De Jesus.
Hello. Yes. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 2026 IBON Yearstarter Birdtalk Forum. It's wonderful to see all of you here today. Thank you for joining us, especially since our last Bird Talk had to be taken online considering there was a typhoon and extremely bad weather, and we were still appreciative for those who were able to join us anyways through our online efforts. So before we move on to our discussion and to our main speakers, first we would like to acknowledge that this forum was made possible with our co-presenters from the Office of the Faculty Regent, Office of the Student Regent, all UP Academic Employees Union, and the UP School of Statistics Student Council, and of course, our official media partner, Altermidya Network. And of course, a special thanks to our partners that are helping to bring IBON to a wider audience. And we are currently live on FB pages of IBON, IBON iPad, and the IBON Bookshop, as well as the pages of our partners. So hello to our audience that is tuning in right now and watching us from online. So many things happened in the last semester, many developments, whether economically, politically. So today we hope to discuss the economic and political developments and what does 2026 hold for us, and even what's gonna happen moving towards the 2028 elections. What is that gonna look like? So without further delay, I would like to introduce our first speaker. He finished his master's degree in development studies and his bachelor's degree in philosophy and economics at the London School of Economics. He currently serves as a member of the IBON Board of Trustees to discuss the ongoing state of the economy and what this means for the country and the Filipino people. Let's welcome IBON's Executive Director, Africa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. Nice to see everyone again after missing our last Bird Talk, so thank you for that. Spaniel. Okay na ba yun? Ano ba to? There, okay. Sige. A lot of things happened, I think the past year, especially the last weeks, especially we talk about the impeachment of President Marcos up. And looming also, of course, for Vice President Sara Duterte. With so many things happening, I think one good thing about the last year is that people are a lot more focused right now on the political situation. I think people are starting to feel their citizenship, not just waiting for the 3-year, 6-year electoral cycle. People are talking about issues, people are going to the streets, taking up issues, people are demanding actual, real, fundamental political change. I think it's quite relevant right now because part of the talk of the change we feel at IBON shouldn't just be about the cleaner government, good governance, fixing corruption, katiwalaan, accountability. This is all very important, but one thing we always want to add is that we don't just want good governance, we actually also want good economics. And in a lot of ways, if we're just talking about good governance from that sort of narrow perspective, if we're just talking about all the sensational fun stuff, I think we will really miss the forest for the trees. So in the short presentation I have, which I should be timing myself, in the short presentation I have, it's an attempt to try to look, well, not to miss the forest for the trees. A lot of sensational stuff has been talked about the last months, but we think some important stuff hasn't been talked about. So in an attempt to try to sort of give our contribution to shifting discussion about especially the economy, IBON is sharing this analysis with you. I know that's an awful slide, but just look at the colors. These are the government's growth targets since 2016. There have been about 23 targeting exercises with the government through the Development and Budget Coordinating Council. Key point is that we have paid attention to the targets. They're all the small numbers on the right side. They've been modified every so often, but key conclusion I think that we should have is that the government isn't very good at targeting. They're not very good at achieving their targets. And when we went through the numbers, it turns out since 2016, the government has failed to meet its growth targets for the coming year 90% of the time. Even in the year ongoing, when they make their revised targeting, they still miss it out. About 60% of the time, they also miss out their targets. So the point being, government, yes, they're quite bad at growth targets. So when they say a growth target, bear in mind, there's a 90% chance they won't even meet that. But underlying that is, why is the government failing so much to account for economic growth? So that's one key point I think to bear in mind. There seems to be something wrong with the government's premises if they think that the situation after 2016 was like the way it was before. And one good indicator of that failure to grasp that the ground is shifting beneath their feet is that they are completely failing to account for growth. Oop, I want to see myself. There. Okay. These are economic growth rates in the post-Marcos dictatorship period since 1986. Just to highlight, we have gotten used to some feeling that the economy is booming, we're doing great, we're among the fastest in Asia. So this is to highlight that feeling of the economy growing fast actually refers to just a feeling from economic growth, in truth, being relatively rapid between the 2004 to the 2016 period. The Philippine economy historically has growth since the post-war period. The average Philippine growth of the economy is about 5%. But for some reason, around the mid-2000s, things started picking up. From 2004, we got 6.6%. To 2016, we had a peak of 7.1%. So something was happening in that 2004 to 2016 period that actually stopped in 2017. So long before the pandemic, 3 years before the pandemic, in 2017, 2018, 2019, growth was actually falling. From the 7.1% peak in 2016, it hit 6.1% in 2019. Of course, collapsed during the pandemic, that big decline, a bit of a rebound. So after the decline and the rebound, we're actually where we are right now, about 5.7% growth for 2025. So what's the point? The point being, the economy was growing fast for that period, but since 2017, it's been slowing. We kind of lost track of that because of the pandemic, because everyone lost track of things during the pandemic. But we argue where the economy is right now is in a bad place because the drivers of growth for that period, 2004 to 2016, are gone. And we argue, if the government doesn't sort of reflect a bit more on that, if it thinks that it can do the same thing as it did before and then magically achieve growth, that's not going to happen. But stepping back a bit, growth is always, everyone's gotten used to talking about growth as an indicator of Philippine development. Rapid growth, economic performance, things are great, economic managers doing great. We'd kind of argue against that narrative. The color blue graph here shows income per capita, it's economic output per population since the 1980s. The higher it is, the higher economic output per person is, the higher income per capita is. The steeper it is, the faster the growth. So when the government always says, oh, look, we're almost at upper middle income status, doesn't mean we're all upper middle income. That just means that that level of income per person has reached a certain threshold. Two super important points to bear in mind from looking at the blue chart, which is income per capita, and the red line, which is self-rated poverty by the social welfare stations. First and most important point, it's a bit weird. From 2004, right when economic growth started accelerating, right when income per person really started soaring, you'll notice the red line, self-rated poverty, started going flat. That's a key point to bear in mind because a question is raised. Where's all that growth going? Where's all that high income per capita going? Where will this upper middle income nonsense actually bring the average Filipino? Clearly, most important point, first point, rapid growth did not just not reduce poverty, it actually kept poverty flat, and arguably, second point, if you look at the right side, it's actually been starting to trend very, very slowly upwards, including in 2024. So that's a key point to bear in mind because what happened? Why is that growth not actually helping most Filipinos? To look at the last 3 years of the Marcos administration, again, using the SWS figures, and we have to stress, for some reason, the government doesn't care about poverty enough to measure it more frequently. It used to count poverty every 3 years, now it's every 2 years, but there's still a delay. So it kind of falls to a private NGO like SWS to estimate poverty on a more high frequency basis. Using the SWS figures, categorically, there are more poor and hungry Filipinos now than at the start of the Marcos administration. Over 2 million increase in poor families to over half of Filipino families, 14.3 million. 1 out of 5 Filipino families reported involuntary hunger. That's almost 6 million families. If you count the borderline Filipinos, borderline poor or borderline not poor, that there are actually 18 million Filipino families, almost 2/3 of Filipino families, poor and vulnerable. Key point to bear in mind, that is after all that rapid growth since the mid-2000s. So that's a bit weird. Why is that growth not being felt? Having said that, growth is being felt by a small group of people. On the right side, some quick numbers about the wealth of the richest Filipinos. The 3 richest Filipinos, their wealth grew, their wealth almost doubled just in the last 3 years, whether we're talking about Ricky Razon, Manny Villar, or Ramon Ang. Taking the top 50 richest as a whole, their wealth also grew by 25%. Looking at the net income of corporations, their profits also increased over that period. So no doubt, growth's there. Those aren't fake numbers. But if you look at where the benefits of the growth are going, it's not going to the poor and vulnerable who are increasing. It's actually going to a handful of Filipinos. That's not a problem just with the Marcos administration. We argue, of course, it's a structural problem, but that's exactly the point. We have to see the forest and not just the trees. Click. There we go. 2 main points about this slide. The chart here measures income inequality in the country. We threw the income distribution of the country into an Excel file, came out with that chart. The height of the chart shows monthly income. The width of the chart shows how many Filipinos are at that level. So quite clearly, this is how extreme income inequality is. The richest 2% of Filipino families have 500,000 to as much as 10, actually 15 million pesos a month income. The poorest 2/3 of Filipino families have at most 26,000 pesos per month. So that's a bit of a problem. It's a very big problem because most people are clustering at the poor level. If income inequality is bad, wealth inequality is worse. The same 2% have a combined wealth of about 20 to 25 trillion pesos, which is combined equivalent to the combined quote-unquote wealth of the poorest 80% of the population. As it is, actually the poorest 85% of adults, 8.5 out of 10, have assets of at most 500,000 pesos, with the bottom 10% actually in chronic debt. Even within the wealthy 2%, there's a huge wealth concentration there. The 3,000 richest Filipinos, 3,000 billionaires, they have a combined wealth of 8.2 trillion. So 3,000 Filipinos, corner one third of the 20 to 25 trillion wealth, equivalent to the combined net worth of the poorest 80% of Filipinos. So this is to say that the growth is being felt, but it's not being felt by the majority. I apologize for the next couple of slides. There are lots of charts, but it's sort of make the point that we do have data to support our assertions. We will be coming up with a paper probably early next week. We'll be sending it to everyone. So all the numbers are there. For this presentation, I'll just focus on the main conclusions. So where has the growth over that rapid growth period been coming from? The Philippines, for the last at least 45 years, and especially during the the rapid growth period, it's mainly driven by household spending. Household spending, it roughly goes between 70 to 75% of the economy every year. What does that mean? That means that the top chart on the left, there. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. This chart here is the economic growth since 2000. It started dropping from the 7.1% in 2016. You'll notice if this is overall economic growth, this is overall household spending growth. So they're quite alike because this component accounts for 70 to 75% of that. So whatever happens here determines what happens here. That's the point. So what was so special about the 2004 to 2016, 2017 period? We argue two things made growth rapid at that time. The first is, from 2004 to 2017, the amount of wage and salary workers expanded. So people were leaving agriculture, people were leaving self-employment, they were entering wage work, to the point that by 2017, almost two-thirds of employed are actually wage earners. Why is that significant? That means that over that period, 2004 to 2017, lots more people had cash. Not necessarily rich, not necessarily lots of cash, but that is 10 million additional people spending over that period. They weren't rich, most were still in informal work, but that was a big boost to spending in the economy. Basically, you had 10 million more people earning a cash income, spending it, which helped boost growth in the 2004 to 2017 period. But what happened after 2017? That increase in wage work started to flatten. So basically, the economy couldn't create any more wage work, much less people that had cash to spend, flattening the growth since then. Another key point, overseas remittances. In the early part of the 2000s, very rapidly growing remittances, but around 2009, 2010, remittances started slowing and actually started dropping as a share of the economy since 2017. Now, the point is, if household spending is the biggest determinant of economic growth, wage work, the expansion of wage work, and the growth in overseas remittances in that period was the main driver of household spending, was the main driver of growth. The problem being two things. One, those growth drivers disappeared after 2017. Second problem, the government didn't do anything for this. These are just sort of the natural outcomes of economic activity. So it's a bit weird. The government can't take credit for either of those two things. It was acting very passively, but the growth was there. So we'd argue these two factors are the biggest drivers of growth, but they're also the biggest dampeners of growth. Also have to add, if household spending is the main source of demand in the country, of course, externally driven demand kind of matters also. But again, looking at that same period, unfortunately, since 2008, global trade has been flat. That's since the 2008-2009 global financial crisis. That's trade as a share of global GDP. Investments as a share of investment inflows as a share of GDP have actually fallen since 2017. Again, perhaps not coincidentally coinciding with the slowdown in the Philippines. So point being, if domestic demand because of household spending was weakening. External demand because of global conditions was also weakening. And I think that's a key point to bear in mind because all the lamentation about, oh, investments are falling, investments, especially private investments, they chase demand. No one's going to invest if people are poor. No one's going to invest if there are no experts to be had. So, key point to bear in mind, even the collapse, the slowdown in investment growth has its roots in the problem with domestic and external demand sources falling. The government, I think, knows this, but they don't say it in public. I mean, they must know this. So actually, since the early 2000s until 2017, the government has been spending a lot. This is government expenditure as a share of GDP, with or without debt service. Again, it kind of corresponds with the rapid growth period, so rapid increases in government spending. But then, when the fiscal crunch came in from 2017, government spending weakened. So government spending actually also was a drag on growth after 2017. Can the government just suddenly start spending? Well, unless they change their theory and believe in modern monetary theory and start printing money, they will remain conservative. So even that fiscal stimulus as an option is gone. It has been gone for some time, but will be gone for the period to come. This chart is a specific example of government construction spending. Again, increased until 2017, but actually kind of flat since 2017. I mean, they're huge amounts, but as a share of the economy, they're actually much less than hiked. How about the point? Ayun, okay. Okay, sorry. Okay. So, where then should Philippine growth come from? Right now, it's actually demand-driven from external sources. We argue growth should be production-driven. So where does the problem lie? These are the Philippines' economic sectors measured since 1946. The blue chart is production. That's manufacturing, agriculture, construction, and mining combined. The orange line is services. The dashed line is the agriculture component of production. The gray line is the manufacturing component of production. The red line is utilities. What does it say? It says that something happened in the late 1970s to suddenly make production fall. What happened since the late 1970s? This is exactly the period of neoliberal globalization. The Philippines was the second country in the world to implement a World Bank structural adjustment program, opening up the economy. Bottom line, all the decades, the 50 years of globalization, opening up the economy, liberalizing, deregulating, privatizing, it's not coincidental. That actually explains why production fell over that whole period. With production falling, services tried to fill the gap. The problem being services weren't actually high productivity, high technology services. They weren't services connected to developed agriculture or to high technology industry. The services that filled in couldn't actually make up for the loss of jobs from the production sector. So right now, Philippine agriculture is the smallest share of the economy in the country's history, but actually even Philippine manufacturing is its smallest share of the economy, not just since the 1970s, but actually since 1949. So the manufacturing is down to its smallest share in 76 years. What needs to be done? Well, clearly, whatever was done over this period should stop. So all that opening up, foreign investors, attracting foreign investment, investor confidence, privatizing, deregulating, government not spending less, government not intervening in the economy. Clearly, that has not worked. So it seems a bit straightforward to just turn that around. Programs of state-driven, development state-driven, agricultural development, Filipino industrialization, and also providing universal social services, they've been proven to work in other countries. And where they have not been done, we have not seen any sort of development. And we like to say this because it's not just the Philippines actually that had problems of deindustrialization over the period of globalization. no country has industrialized in that whole period. The last great industrializers, South Korea, Taiwan, did it in the pre-globalization era, 60s, 70s. Even Singapore and Hong Kong were doing it in the 60s and 70s. Some might say, yeah, but didn't China develop rapidly in the 1990s? Yes and no. What China did was on the back of industrial development, a foundation built during the socialist period. So the Philippines is a good example of what not to do. The world is actually a good example of what not to do. Okay. I know this chart looks similar, but the first chart looked at economic output by sector. This chart looks at employment per sector. So clearly, same color coding, production work has been declining, agriculture work has been declining, manufacturing super tiny now. The Philippines actually has, I think, third or possibly at least the fourth worst manufacturing, the Philippines has the third or fourth lowest manufacturing share in Southeast Asia. So that's pretty bad. What's the point? The point is, with production jobs falling, most work is now taken up by the service sector. Over half of the work is in the service sector. Problem with the service sector work is that it's mostly poor quality work. Same thing with agriculture, it's mostly poor quality work. So I think that's a key point to bear in mind. Nothing bad with services per se, because to say something is services covers all sorts of services. It covers trade, it covers BPOs, it covers actually research and development for manufacturing, it covers finance, it covers education. Services is a catch-all, so there's actually not any way to talk about services as a homogeneous whole. The problem is, in the Philippines, 2/3 of work right now is in work that's very poorly paid, especially service sector work. And that keeps the Philippines in a vicious cycle. If most work is in poorly paying work, especially informal services work, that means demand is low and incomes are low. If demand is low and incomes are low, there's no market to actually produce industrial goods at any sort of proper scale. If there's no other work to be had but poorly paying service sector work, that cuts into household spending. And household spending is low because of your low-paying jobs. Yeah, once in a while you can get cash assistance, once in a while you can get remittances, but the bottom line, you're not actually creating enough income in the household, in the family, to spend in the economy. And if you're spending in the economy, and most of your spending goes to wage-related services, and then whatever manufactured goods you buy, a lot of it is imported, it worsens the trade deficit, it's a leakage of incomes, but it keeps the Philippines stuck in a vicious circle of poverty and underdevelopment. Low household incomes spent on services, low productivity services, not creating jobs and incomes, no jobs and incomes, household spending. So that sort of consumption trap is actually a long-term trap for the Philippines, which we're not seeing any changes now. Now, last Friday, the government had this big, bold reforms forum. If you heard about it, maybe you didn't. The media were actually banned from taking pictures, diba? So sounds like the signing of the 2026 budget. So there was some big secret, apparently, in the Big Bold Reforms Forum. But as far as we could gather from some media reports, the Big Bold Reforms talked about, you tell me these are big and bold, 14-day visa-free entry for China, 4 billion pesos for the CARS program. By the way, 4.3 billion pesos is about 1/3 of what the Diskaya gets in contracts every year at their peak. BAR tax audit overhaul. No more use in the BAR to extort from corporations. DPWH said, okay, we will spend on infrastructure like they haven't been for the last 30 years. Same old, attract investment, investor confidence. Same old, cut red tape, cut out the bureaucratic nonsense. And then, for the government agencies which have been a bit slow, catch-up plans to meet their plans. What's the problem there? In all honesty, does anyone think this huge decline over 50 years in manufacturing, in industry, in production will be fixed by a 14-day visa, by 4 billion pesos for a CARS program, by reforming the BAR tax, etc., etc. Problem is, that is not addressing the problem. They're not big, bold reforms. They're like tiny, tame tweaks. They actually don't do anything to shift this. And I think that's where the problem lies. If the government, all they can think about with big, bold reforms is not agrarian reform and agricultural development, not Philippine industrialization, not providing universal social services, not actually implementing a progressive tax system to generate revenues for all the things government has to do, there's nothing big or bold about the reforms they're proposing. What is the government actually doing? Well, they spent a lot of money right now on ayuda, social assistance. A lot of middle class have been whining, oh, kawawa naman kami. How come only the poor get ayuda? Why don't the middle class get help as well? That's a fair point, because the middle class, most middle class don't actually have middle class lives. Most middle class are borderline. You just take someone to get sick or some accident to cut their income stream. What's the point here? If you look at the magnitude of the country's problem, 14.3 million poor families as of November, 60 million poor Filipinos at 4.2 persons per family. That's even underestimate. 24 million involuntary hungry Filipinos. If you're talking about, with our data from the FAO, 51 million Filipinos unable to afford a healthy diet, 38 million moderately or severely food insecure Filipinos. What does the government have as a real response to that? A whole bunch of social programs. Of course, a lot of motivations of social programs. They're used as mechanisms of patronage. They use sort of suppress public dissent. But even the numbers, they just don't match. If you're talking about 14.3 poor families, even the government's flagship program, the 4Ps, doesn't even cover 1/3 of that. Even if you add the 6.7 million IX beneficiaries, and that doesn't even come up to the self-rated poor families. Point being, these are the various programs of the government: Sustainable Livelihood Program, 4Ps, assistance to individuals in crisis circumstances, medical assistance, to provide for informal workers, even crazier, walang gutom, so you're going to match 24 million hungry Filipinos with that many beneficiaries, indigent and senior pensions, supplementary feeding. Point being, these will never be enough. And they shouldn't have to be enough. The point is, people are poor, people don't have incomes, they can't buy food, not because of a lack of government social programs. They don't have incomes, they can't buy enough food because they don't have jobs. They don't have jobs because the government is not doing anything, literally. They're not doing anything, meaningful, to be nice. They're not doing anything to develop Filipino agriculture, make food cheaper, make farmers more productive, increase their incomes. Most importantly, they're not doing anything to develop Filipino industry. And IBON's been talking about this, I've been in IBON for about, 15, 20 years now. We've also been talking about industrialization, industrial development, but the government, thinks, oh no, let's just do the free market, open up, that'll take care of itself. Why do we think that political change is critical? Well, political change is critical because in the Philippines, there's this awful interconnection between the political elites and the economic elites. And I think the most emblematic way to look at that is look at the three richest Filipinos. Ricky Razon gets a bonanza now with the Manampaya fine. Of course, that's with concessions by government. Manny Villar, Ramon Ang. The three richest Filipinos actually behind 3 of the 5 biggest political parties in the country. The other 2 parties change depending who's in power. If the president comes from the Partido Federal, people get on the Partido Federal. If they come from the Liberal Party, they go to the Liberal Party. If they're from PDP Laban, they go to PDP Laban. But the three consistently biggest political parties of the country are backed by billionaires. After the last elections, we're talking about the 3 billionaire political parties having 42% of the Senate, 27% of Congress, 1/3 of all governorships. So I think it's quite important because businesses, especially the scale they have, they need a lot of government interventions. They need court decisions on taxes. They need permits for local government. They need to meet environmental clearances. They need government franchises, whole host of things. Now, I'd love it if all of us are so nice to think that these three economic interests don't use their political power to serve the economic interests and back again. So if you're like that, you're such a nice person. Unfortunately, that same problem of billionaire political parties actually holds in terms of our quote-unquote so-called representative democracy. So this is the current composition of the Senate. After the recently released statement of assets and liabilities, we've lined them up by party. These are from the billionaire political parties. Quick summary, the net worth or the wealth of the senators, the most nationally representative, supposedly, more politicians, they have anywhere net worth of 19 million to 1.3 billion pesos. That makes every senator richer than 98.6% of the Filipino population. So, okay, we can quibble. Is that a good example of representativeness? Maybe that's not everything, but it kind of means something. If income, wealth is taken as a sign of representativeness, our current Senate leadership represents the richest 1.4% of the Filipino population. In contrast, the poorest 102 million Filipinos, they have quote-unquote wealth of at most 500,000 pesos, with most actually having much, much less, and with the bottom, I think 5 to 10% actually in chronic debt. The reason I sort of wanted to wrap up the economic situation with the sort of political control over economic levers, or economic policies, because there is no doubt no country has developed, well, especially a big country like the Philippines, without industrializing. Industrialization means high productivity, technology-intensive production. It also actually means not just being a location for high technology-intensive production, not being an address for Intel in Cavite or Texas Instruments in Baguio. It actually means indigenous Filipino capacity to produce that stuff. Now, industrialization is not easy, but it has to be done. So the question is, what are the so many million steps needed to start actually doing that? Well, first we have to bear in mind, industrialization is so disruptive, it shakes up the status quo about the alignment of economic and political forces of the country. It shakes up how other countries benefit from Filipino cheap labor, from Filipino minerals, from Filipino captive markets. It actually also antagonizes a lot of foreigners who benefit from the Philippines. It is so disruptive. And actually, looking back, a lot of the big industrialization experiences actually had threats of war around them. France and Germany had the Franco-Prussian War. The US was trying to get independence from Britain. South Korea was scared of North Korea and Chinese communism. Taiwan was scared of China, etc., etc. So it's so disruptive. But the thing is, it is so disruptive because it does so much. So if you're going to look for incremental changes, that's not going to get anywhere. If you want big changes, you really have to disrupt things. And what's the most important thing that needs disrupting in the country right now? We argue our politics. Our politics has to be disrupted because if the leadership, one, doesn't even have a view over the long term of what needs to be done for industrialization, we've actually stumbled from day one. Secondly, even if the government has that view, if they don't build a broad coalition, not just within political forces in government, but also among the public with a real mass mobilization, even that view won't actually materialize. And third, I think especially now, the world is not the same. There are a lot of other countries right now, even the world's biggest industrial powers, like the United States, who are becoming more protectionist. Actually, the world is actually becoming even more hostile to domestic industrialization. But the thing is, we have to do it. Either you give up, don't do anything, let things slide, let things stay as they are, which is bad for most Filipinos, or we do what needs to be done. And a lot needs to be done. In terms of policies, it's not just the vision of industrialization. which is a political push, we need the base of agrarian reform rural development. There's no shortcut to development to be able to produce things. Right now, who are the most advanced producers in the country? Well, foreigners with their address and economic zone, but also in terms of sheer scale, Filipino farmers. So that is actually a core foundation for industrialization, which the government is not taking care of. Even the last budget, with a big realignment from flood control, it went to farm-to-market roads. There has been no change in Philippine government support for agriculture, which is still about just 3 to 4% of the national budget. We need financing for Philippine industrialization. The 2026 budget has about 7 or 8 billion pesos for its 3 flagship industrialization programs. The Small Business Corporation and the pagbabago para sa pondo para sa pagbabago at asenso, parang P4. So even if you add the CARS program with 4 billion pesos, what does it mean? The government has industrial support of 12 billion pesos. Again, smaller than the Discayas get in contracts in 1 year. So financing has to mobilize for industrialization. At the same time, the government has to protect the economy. You can't just sort of expect Filipino producers to suddenly be producing at scale, at the quality that's needed. So actually there is a learning curve. There is logic to the infant industry argument. Of course, I have to put a lot of controls for the incentives, but protectionism is essential. No country has developed with an open economy. Every country that's industrialized has gone through a period of protectionism. And of course, direct support for Philippine industries, whether in terms of R&D, research, technology support, cheap financing, government procurement. The government has to actually look at Filipino industries, look for winners, support them. If they fail, look for other winners, but it has to be sustained. And a lot of this can only be done not in a 3-year, 6-year cycle, but has to be done over 15 years, 20 years. Even China, when they had their master plan for industrialization 5 years ago, they actually had a 15-year master plan for China 2030. At the same time, one big lesson, we don't industrialize without taking care of people's rights and welfare. We don't want a repeat of industrializing on the back of cheap labor, or industrializing but without actually generating the public services people need. So that actually has to be kept in mind as well. So I'm going to close with that. It's a whole forum in itself, but the point is, there is a strong example in the Philippines what not to do. Privatization, liberalization, deregulation, that should be thrown out the window. At the same time, there are clear examples of what has succeeded. Industrialization has used some combination of these. But third, of course, we have to adapt to how things have changed in the modern world, changed in terms of global supply chains, how things have happened. But that's the whole point of adapting. And unless the Philippines takes that first step, we'll never be able to actually adapt and learn because we haven't even tried, so we've lost before we even started. That's it. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Sunny. Before we introduce our next speaker, I just wanted to acknowledge members of the IBON Board of Trustees who have joined us today. I'd like to welcome Dr. Marion Jimenez Tan. Okay, hello po. Dr. Judy Tagiwalo. And Mr. Alex Aquino. Okay. Thank you po. Thank you for joining us today. So, our second speaker finished her AB Economics degree at the University of the Philippines, Manila. She is currently a member of the Board of Trustees for both IBON and the Asian Pacific Research Network to discuss the political situation and the challenges that the country is facing and what directions we would possibly take. Let's welcome IBON's Research Head and Executive Editor, Rosario Guzman.
Thank you, Audrey. Yeah. Riser. Magandang hapon. Good afternoon po. Okay, let's cut to the chase. As dramatic as the worsening economic decline is the political instability that is manifesting in the worst elite rivalries, fueled by the greediest ambitions. That's what we're witnessing. From the start, we have already assessed a Marcos Jr. leadership as weak. No? He is exercising calculated silence on the more important issues. He is also, in the words of the economic managers, staying the course of pro-oligarchs and neoliberal policymaking. He has also adopted a colonial and subservient foreign policy, and he has continued the draconian laws of the previous Duterte regime. So the Marcos name was rebranded and cunningly hitched to the populist Duterte brand. But this failed to capture the hearts and minds of the majority. But what the unit team actually captured were the votes through wealth, political machinery, and massive electoral fraud. So name rehabilitation, the rehabilitation of the Marcos name actually failed. No? And now we are seeing the unsteady alliance breaking down barely 2 years in office. And now in barely 2 years, we are also seeing the country's two most powerful political dynasties vying for political positions in 2028 in what could be the most ferocious electoral contest in our history. So that, in a nutshell, is what we are seeing. But if we just look back, just last year, no, the first major political showdown happened in May 2025, in the midterm elections, which revealed the president's political vulnerability. Duterte-aligned candidates and liberal opposition figures gained seats at the expense of the administration slate. And although some opposition candidates may have collaborated tactically with the administration, the unfavorable results still reflect both elite hedging and the uncertainty over the balance of power. So, we're trying here to show, yes, next slide, please. So, the Marcos Jr. camp fails to steady political shocks. No? One blunder after another. That's a nice series title. One blunder after another. I'll just talk about two blunders, and then we go on analyzing what is in store for all of us. Yung isa, President Marcos is trying to actually overcome yung ineffectual leadership niya to tighten control over fiscal resources. Yun lang naman yun, no? For patronage and control, to constrain the Dutertes and to restore public legitimacy in the run-up to the 2028 elections. But he has failed, as I said. There are two blunders. He has failed to steady the political shocks, and one of these is he adopted an anti-corruption campaign or posture in mid-2025, projecting a toughness he had never seen or shown before, publicly shaming abusive contractors and legislators, and initiating investigation into the anomalous flood control projects, while avoiding talking about other pork barrel projects. So there, no, using the anti-corruption posture or the flood control issue. Hindi naman yun, it's not really about, having the resolve of mahiya naman kayo and I'm going after you. No, that is actually just the move, no, to control, to assert control and regain public support. But this failed miserably for 4 reasons. it backfired, no, by the end of the year. One is that President Marcos failed to strengthen his position, and the public was instead enraged by the obscene wealth and luxury of the contractors and legislators, by the billions of pesos in kickbacks and embezzled funds, while the lives of ordinary Filipinos remained burdened with insecure jobs and livelihood, low incomes, rising prices, and diminished social services. I think doon nanggaling yung rage. When we were seeing them living in luxury, while our economic distress was worsening and is still worsening. So the public, especially the poor, was enraged. Number two, the president's anti-corruption campaign has generated political fallout that is unparalleled in the country's history. I've never seen this. I'm still young, but I haven't seen this in my lifetime. The resignations of the House Speaker, the Senate President, Public Works Secretary, Budget Secretary, Executive Secretary, and a long list of operators and bagmen, from public engineers to undersecretaries, falling, until the House Appropriations Chair Zaldico, who had gone into hiding, emerged to reveal that the final recipients of the billions of kickbacks were House Speaker Romualdez and his cousin, President Marcos. Number three, wala pa ring nakukulong. You know, I landing coming from Nepal in December. No? So medyo antok pa yung mga OFWs, but a guy, you know, yawned, tapos stretch and said, ay nako, wala pa ring nakukulong. That is the sentiment of of an OFW coming home for December. So, no cases have been filed yet, not even for so-called big fish. No, walang nakukulong or nakasuhan, no? And then, neither the Senate nor the House of Representatives has pursued investigation into the president or his cousin, despite serious allegations that at least merit inquiry. Andun na eh. Bakit wala? No? There's no move to investigate them. And likewise, the Office of the Ombudsman and other anti-corruption agencies like the Commission on Audit, the Department of Justice, or even the Anti-Money Laundering Council that has been used to make up cases against activists and development workers, have not started any probes, even if they are constitutionally mandated to do so. So it has become increasingly clear to the public that the investigation initiated by the president, the ICI or whatever is left of it, is only intended to whitewash the grim reality that corruption originates from and ultimately leads back to the president. So adding to the frustration and public outrage is the tendency, again, instead of Marcos and Duterte camps to subsume the corruption issue and the processes, including the impeachment cases now filed against them, in their factional bickering. Nare-reduce lang dun sa away ng Marcos and Duterte. And because they have their sights, no, on the 2028 elections. Okay, so the Marcos presidency has only initiated a cover-up. Number four, the public has become increasingly aware that corruption is not episodic. PDAF, NBNZTE deal, you know, for those who have witnessed those corruptions over time, it's not episodic, it is systemic. And the public has become increasingly aware as well that plunder starts with the national expenditure program, or the NEP, which is the President's budget submission to Congress, and ends with the General Appropriations Act, or GAA, after both houses have concurred, which is ultimately signed by the President. And the budgets he signed off had the largest unprogrammed appropriations, infrastructure outlays, and flood control projects that the country has ever seen. 2.1 trillion pesos in 2023, 4.9 trillion pesos in 2024, and 986.5 billion in 2025. And these amounts included untold pork barrel, which could not have been released secretly, but as part of official government policy and using formal budget mechanisms like the balanced baseline managed shamelessly bearing the President's initials, BBM parametric formula, used to distribute funds across districts or agencies, which is now revealed to be called allocables. No? In short, yung corruption is not accidental or low level. It was systematically built into the budget process itself and required approval and machinery at the highest levels. So the issue has only revealed that corruption is systemic. Mounting mass protests, especially by the youth, have focused on articulating that corruption is just one of the forms of bureaucrat capitalism. So we're showing you here other forms of bureaucrat capitalism. Corruption, that's a common knowledge, embezzlement of funds, or the abuse of people's money. But number two, I guess, has been discussed and has been pointed out to us by Sunny, that the neoliberal policies that have been implemented are actually turning over public assets, public utilities, natural resources to foreign corporations and local oligarchs, and can only be made possible if you have a government that allows it, and can only be allowed by that government if there's something for that government, not for the people. So privatization and even liberalization is a form of bureaucrat capitalism because you practically turned over public resources for private gain. Number three, land grabbing in the guise of development projects. As we speak now, the communities and the residents of Dupax del Norte are defending their land against mining encroachment. And the government, the state, will just say, oh, this is development project, but it's actually grabbing the land from the more productive sector or section of society or of community. Number four, control over funds of government corporations, banks, financial institutions, and social insurance. This is why we don't feel comfortable when we say, increase the budget for PhilHealth. I mean, nothing, also again in my lifetime, which is short, I haven't really experienced na yung PhilHealth is clean of corruption. So, again, this is part of the whole system. Collusion with criminal syndicates. The government is colluding with smugglers, is colluding with illegal gamblers, or allowing gambling, illegal gambling to come to, at least to formalize it into the economy. And lastly, counterinsurgency and military contracts and funds. Why is the AFP modernization budget still there after 30 or even 40 years? Ito pa rin, it's still in the budget. And we are not given by the US, for example, ammunition or our war material for free. We are being sold second-hand war material. Hindi lang yon. They say, maubos na ang NPA, right? And there is a 5,000 pesos, or maybe even 15,000, depends on the rank, given to surrenderies. But now they fake surrenderies, so they can get that money. And they say, ubos na ang NPA. But every now and then, we see the photoshopped surrenderies showing yung mga guns and, explosives. So that is part of corruption. The military, thanks to martial law, is part of the whole bureaucrat capitalism. So bureaucrat capitalism is the system where politicians and public officials use their positions to accumulate wealth in power. In the words of the youth organization Anak Bayan, it is a system where the government is not a neutral institution, but a machine that functions like a big business enterprise for the ruling elite. You know that instance when yung youth or kayo, no, even, you learn a new word, right? And the youth have been studying bureaucrat capitalism. Isn't it that you wait for the moment when you can use it correctly? Diba ganon? That's how you increase your vocabulary. So the youth have had that moment in 2025. And immediately they called whatever was happening with the flood control scandal, they called it bureaucrat capitalism and increased the whole public discourse. So, and then pointing out also the political dynasties, the billionaires in power, and the courts, yung mga korte that favor them and absolve them from appropriating private gain from state resources. These are the agents of bureaucrat capitalism. Okay, sorry. Next slide. Number 2, so using the flood control project to regain political power. Fail, right? The second blunder is that President Marcos then used the 2026 budget to shore up his position and projecting it, no, as the most transparent budget process. So you know what is ironic is that it was the DBM OIC who was giving this propaganda. And it's a pity because he is OIC. And what happened to the original DBM secretary? But now you're telling me that this is the most transparent budget process. But this propaganda, again, fails just the same. Why? Because when you look, a closer look at the 2026 budget will reveal that allocables remain. There are about 130 million pesos for each congressman and 2 to 3 billion pesos for each senator from the DPWH budget, and that is not counting the 33 billion pesos farm-to-market roads under the Department of Agriculture. Unprogrammed appropriations remain, amounting to about 157 billion pesos. Yes, it's small compared to the more than 800 billion pesos in 2024, but still more than double than Duterte's first year. So it's still a huge allocation for unprogrammed appropriations. Pork barrel remains, hard pork of about 500 billion pesos and soft pork for about 200 billion pesos as of latest scrutiny. The confidential and intelligence funds of the Office of the President to the tune of 4.5 billion pesos is intact. And this is discretionary. It's for confidential intelligence funds, not subject to any to audit. The NTF LCAC's budget for the so-called Barangay Development Program, ito yung tinatawag na General's Pork, no, remains at 8 billion pesos. So the total budget of NTF LCAC of 9.2 billion pesos for 2026 is the highest since President Marcos Jr. took over, increasing by 202% from last year. So after everything, the approved 6.8 trillion pesos budget 2026 GAA actually remains not only pork barrel ridden and funding source for corruption, it is also funding source for repression. The planned debt servicing remains largely for paying debt. Yung planned debt servicing is 2 trillion. That is already 1/4 of the total national budget. But the thing is, the total borrowing plan for the year is reportedly 2.68 trillion. So if you look at it, it implies that 77% of the new borrowings, the planned new borrowings, will be used again to pay for debt. And that is instead of funding development priorities. Another spin is the Marcos Jr. administration claiming that the 2026 budget is a true education budget. No? Because if you look at it historically, like its predecessor, the Duterte government and the Marcos government had consistently relegated education to second priority behind infrastructure spending. Ano to eh, this is the, if you also noticed yung, in the economic growth where there is already deceleration or slowdown from all the demand drivers since 2017, we're also seeing here that since then, the GDP was only propped up by infrastructure spending. And since then also, education has been second priority. Well, now, and also since then, we've been seeing yung chronic learning shortages and even globally worst learning outcomes, no, just recently released. Na, again, we are holding the record for having the worst learning outcomes that, you know, senior high school cannot even, you know, comprehend what they are reading, etc., etc. So now apparently education receives the largest allocation. That's a 31% increase from last year. That's 224.5 billion pesos increase. But when you look at how it compares with the DPWH, it's because there is a remarkable decrease of the DPWH budget from an average annual of 947.4 billion, ano na lang siya ngayon, 529.6 billion. Okay, sabi natin, okay, it's comparing, you know, it's really reallocating, blah. While there appears to be funding increase for school operations, it does not make a dramatic difference if we consider the growth in enrollment. So we made computations. So apparently the Marcos government just, you know, gave 700 pesos increase for each student. But still another closer scrutiny reveals a 200% increase in the funds for the construction of basic education facilities. Again, infrastructure. And there is a 100% increase in school-based feeding program. Again, a soft pork. So what we're seeing here is there is also an allocation of 330 billion pesos for so-called public school infra program where there was none before. So, naglolokohan tayo eh. So, true education budget, but it's just actually a redistribution no, kung saan where infrastructure spending can be allocated. So, after everything, Marcos Jr.'s performative transparency campaign only reveals that the national budget remains a tool for political control and patronage that is a budget for corruption, militarism, and debt servicing. It still reveals that we are still on austerity and budget deficit, and it still reveals that structural development priorities remain underfunded. And now using the 2026 budget only reveals that the Marcos Jr. administration is incapable of meaningful economic reforms. Okay. So despite attempts at political consolidation, executive control is more uncertain, contingent, transactional. So political visibility, yung optics, yung narrative setting that will define or dominate 2026, while social, economic, and even political reforms will be sidelined. The administration will be focusing on the intensifying intra-elite rivalry to maintain its political power at the expense of the people's demands for accountability, at the expense of the people's deeper grievances for better economy. So, 2026, intramurals na yan ng 2028. The moves, so what do we see here? No, just explain the photos. BBM has the resources. Sara Duterte has solid DDS core, about 30 to 35% core support. And the so-called third force is yet to show coherent and clear alternative economic strategy that is alternative to the elite-dominated and pro-US neoliberal policies. So the moves of the Marcos camp will be calculated to rebuild credibility and give the appearance of resolve, no? So without fundamentally, syempre, disrupting patronage, entrenched patronage networks. It shall aim to assert BBM's dominance over Congress and local governments, control political damage from public frustration, but with selectivity and impunity pa rin. And this will be difficult in the face of mounting and strengthening public pressure demanding genuine investigations, prosecutions, and convictions. The people's movements are also preventing politicians from using accountability only as a political weapon to attack or control their rivals instead of genuinely fighting corruption. But the elites, siyempre careful that their interests are not put at risk, are quick to attack pro-democracy forces, deter wider participation, neutralize radical demands. The country's biggest economic oligarchs, after all, are behind the country's biggest political parties. Then the armed forces, you know, we have a military that is politicized because of martial law. It's one of the dysfunctions of martial law. So the military, the armed forces, are more inclined, of course, towards, you know, constitutional continuity and the elite elections. So in this context, while the protests gain momentum, the Marcos government builds up the infrastructure for repression. Ano ba yung infrastructure niya? Lawfare, using laws for repression, red tagging, vilification, surveillance, cyber surveillance, and financial and regulatory controls. Trumped-up cases against activists, journalists, and other human rights defenders continue to be filed and decided on with unjust convictions. Community bombings and strafing, harassment, and assaults against people's organizations and communities, and unforced disappearances of activists have increased under the Marcos Jr. presidency. And meanwhile, we are seeing here the president deepening military and security alliance with the U.S. according to the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, allowing the country to be a cog in U.S. regional defense industrial base. And also the Marcos Jr. Government will use its ASEAN leadership to support the U.S. Effort to box out China from regional dominance. Marcos Jr. will also, by doing so, it further exposes the country to worsening geopolitics and, of course, particularly complicating elite factions, yung rivalry ng US-China, with the Dutertes perceived to be pro-China. So will the US have a say on the corruption issue? Well, the US favors system stability and elite-managed constitutional continuity through elections, not extra-constitutional democratic changes. So it will be supportive of BBM and the pink ones, third force, including any overt or quiet alliance between them, if they avoid steering sovereignty or intervention issues. Last slide. Yeah. So, 10 minutes? 5 minutes. Okay. BBM barely survived 2025, and only because the elites were quick enough to undermine radical democratic demands, and re-legitimize formal accountability. No? But these moves are volatile. We know that. And there is undeniably broader elite fragmentation on one hand, and the heightened political public attention to bureaucrat capitalism on the other hand. And underneath these systemic faults is the intensifying economic crisis. So it's really very, not just, it's shaky. No? And then impeachment complaints are filed both against the president and the vice president, which is quite unprecedented in the country's history. And now the credibility of the whole political system is at stake in how it will handle demand for accountability. So that is what we mean by ripe. But on the other hand, when we look at the on the latest handling by BBM, there may be three directions. There can be downward drift where the elite will manage and stabilize the situation, which means there will be no transformation from all what we've been discussing from the beginning. Number two, there can be political infighting that will intensify and will see greater economic crisis. Number three, there will be more productive transformation. But as Sunny said, national industrialization is a disruption. And I should also say that productive and positive transformation will be disruptive in the sense that it will be pushed by people's democratic struggles. Disruptive from the point of view of the elite. We are looking at the third scenario. There is an expansion of social movements and mass mobilizations, demanding democratic reforms, and this is the heightened discourse, drawing attention to the inability of political forces or whoever wants to run in 2028 to deliver basic, far-reaching social and economic reforms needed by the majority poor and vulnerable Filipinos. Yung diskurso natin is not just demanding the reform. We are drawing attention to the inability of political forces to deliver the reforms. Progressive groups have stronger cross-sector alliances, left and progressive groups, and they are more issue-based mass mobilizations, and they have proven themselves to be the crucial in pushing for democratic systemic change. And we are part of that progressive group. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose B, and thank you again, Sunny, for your input today. And of course, I'm sure all of you are looking forward to, or have some questions, or looking to kind of share also your thoughts on what was shared today. But before we go there, we have a few acknowledgements and actually guest artists with us here today. So first, I just wanted to acknowledge we have with us in our audience representatives from embassies and UN org present. So we'd just like to welcome from the Embassy of Argentina, Gabriel Hernan Rivera and Fabricio Sordoni. Elnora P. Jensen from the Embassy of Australia. Qian Chen and Cao Kaiwan of the Embassy of China. Hugo Ruiz of the Embassy of France. Nabila Ayu Benita of the Embassy of Indonesia. Nikki Delphine of the Embassy of Norway. Sverif Roman of the Embassy of Russia. And from the Office of the United Nations Higher Commission for Human Rights, Mr. John Philip Binondo. So here with us today to perform the song Pasensya that tells the struggle of ordinary Filipinos amid systemic oppression and the hope of justice through collective struggle, let's please give a warm welcome to our guest artist, Dania Reyes of Pisara, Diliman. Tanya. One more round of applause, please. Thank you, thank you. Before we enter our open forum and short talk with our resource speakers, I just wanted to recognize a few of our government personalities that are also here with us today. Here with us from the Senate of the Philippines is Sersis Nitafan. From the Senate of the Economic Planning Office, Arlene F. Sison. And from Senate Legislation, Maria Katrina Ditan. From the Quezon City Local Government Unit, here with us today from the Local Economic Development and Investment Promotions Office is Mr. Ruel C. Ruiz Jr. And also from the QC LGU, Mariel Zacarias and Jessamay Gabon. We also have several representatives in attendance from the Department of Education, Quezon City Division. And we also have with us today from the Metropolitan Water Works Sewage Systems Regulatory Office, Melissa B. Arabia Di Maiwat. Thank you again all for joining us today. Tapos, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, not with us today, I misspoke, is a representative from the Embassy of Russia. Apologies, and I really practiced saying that name, but it's okay. So hopefully they're watching online if they were unable to make it. So, okay. So with that, before we begin or go into our open forum segment, I just wanted to review a few of the open forum guidelines. One, you can share your thoughts or questions by either writing these down on the bottom space of the program. I believe there was a program that was given to you or distributed. So if you have questions and you prefer to write them down, you can do so, and you can pass to our ushers who will be in the aisles and available to get those written down questions. And or you can come up to one of the two microphones that are here in the left and right aisles and line up to also directly ask your questions of our speakers. And if you do choose to come up to the mic, we would appreciate it if you clearly state your name, your organization, and a very gentle reminder to please keep it short and sweet, like sana it's not going to be a long comment or a long question, so that we'll have enough time to answer the questions or hear the insights of other audience members. Okay, so with that, I would like to request Mr. Sunny Africa and Rosario Guzman to please come to the stage for a little chat. Please come into my sala, living room area. Oh, I feel like I'm also actually in my sala. Oh wait, is everything clean? Here's a microphone. You really want to say? Oh, really? Okay. It's a little change from how we usually do this. I think I'm supposed to be here where you're sitting. Yes, yes. Okay. Hi, Sunny. Hi, Rose B. So, your inputs were really interesting because, like, aside from discussing more deeply about the economic situation, because we've already had like a lot of things that are ongoing since last year. People saying that the issues of corruption, what's happening, the political instability, that's what's affecting why our economy is going to be unstable, or why growth is slowing, or we're not performing as well. Although there are recent forecasts that have come out where they're saying that, oh no, the economy will do well in the coming year, will grow in the coming year. And but we're seeing that as what you're mentioning, that it's more systemic. Systemic in terms of the economic problems that have been ongoing. And then even with the political problems, it's not something, oh, it's just a little bit of infighting between a few politicians, but it's something that's also systemic. It's also very much a part of our greater or deeper problems that need to be discussed. So I think what was interesting, or if maybe you could explain more, for example, with the economy, you mentioned that, Sunny mentioned earlier that, okay, the government is now saying we need big, bold reforms, but it seems like it's more of the same things that they've been mentioning ever since the beginning of the administration, and which is also oddly familiar to what other administrations have been promoting and pushing. And then we need to, and we've actually, either IBON, people's organizations, people's movements have actually proposed what we think are actually big, bold reforms, and what Sunny mentioned as being disruptive. So even though we see that bigger change is needed, what are the obstacles? Like, what's like really, I mean, you kind of mentioned it, but maybe we need to like talk about it a little bit more. Like, what is really preventing from these alternatives from what we said, agrarian reform, agriculture development, why is there such resistance, and where's the resistance coming from? Are the microphones, sorry, are the microphones on? Yes, either of you. Like you, Jack and Boy.
Yan. Meron na? Okay, sige. Okay. Biggest obstacle. I think maybe the biggest can occur in two levels. I think one is a failure of imagination by the leadership and economic managers. In a lot of ways, that wrong thinking about free markets are great, globalization is good, just open up, we'll become competitive. That's really captured the minds of people, because in a lot of ways, our school system, our economics education system ingrains that thinking with very obsolete textbooks. And then when you rise to the ranks professionally, unless you subscribe to that same sort of thinking, you won't rise to the ranks professionally, you won't get a career path. And then that actually feeds into the thinking of politicians. So I think at one level, there's a failure of imagination, because I think intellectually there's an inability to grasp how problematic these textbook economics have been, and there's a failure to grasp what economic history around the world has shown. So I think at one level that's quite important, and I don't want to underestimate that. But of course, there's also a political barrier. The political barrier to that is there are economic interests benefiting from the current setup. I mean, when you look at the sort of profile of the country's biggest oligarchs, the biggest capitalists, they actually benefit from the way things are operating now. They benefit because they are providing utilities and services to a service-driven economy that is reliant on foreign investment to boost itself. So if your biggest businessmen, if your biggest oligarchs are benefiting from the way things are, if they're benefiting from providing the non-tradables, but then just allowing the tradables in because they don't have interest there, then actually there's no economic compulsion to develop. So I think there is a big fear among the current biggest businesses that if the Philippines adopts a national industrialization policy, that will disrupt what they've gotten accustomed to in terms of how they make money. And I think especially right now, they actually might be even more afraid to face the aftershocks of that. They might get tariff retaliation or some kind of investment retaliation, or they might get sort of some blowback from that. Again, because the world has changed with the Trump administration being much more aggressive with its protectionist policies. There has been a strong trend for protectionist policy since 2008, 2009. So I think that sort of disruption in your accustomed ways of doing business, I think, gets in the way. So I think, yeah, intellectually, there's a failure to grasp the lessons from history, including our negative history. But politically, the economic forces that would that are so influential in the Philippines, I think will be feel that they'll be disrupted by a disruption in their accustomed economic policies.
All right. So I was following what Sunny said. It's ideologically and politically there are barriers or obstacles. But immediately I thought of this. I don't know who said this, but the Filipino, sino ba nagsabi nun? Has this culture that you backslide, and you have a revolution, and then you just you sit back again and relax, and you have people power and you sit back again and relax, right? And as I was listening to that, not really a political analyst, maybe some cultural professor, actually that's not the fault of the Filipino. I think what is our problem is that there is intensifying repression, or the infrastructure of repression that protects elite interests. So immediately, to answer your question, I said the obstacle now to really push for democratic changes is that the state uses repression, and this can be always a violent tool to repress any dissent or any demand for democratic reforms. And that's what we are experiencing now. But as we discussed earlier, it's still ripe to push for those changes, to push for reforms. Why? Because we have proven that violent or not, that there can be some semblance of peace or diplomacy or some NGO, civil society alliance with the state or with the government. The Filipino is still looking for a democratic change. So on the one hand, while the repression is increasing, on the other hand, we also have that culture that we do not shut up.
Sorry, a bit slow. I think also to highlight, these are barriers that can be overcome. The intellectual barrier can be overcome by intellectual honesty and openness to new ideas, and just thinking beyond the textbooks and what your career path actually gives you. So I think that first barrier can quite easily be overcome. Theoretically, even the second barrier can be overcome. Business does what business does, which is make a profit. If the government had an industrialization policy, it could actually make developing Filipino industries profitable. But that's the problem. If the government doesn't have that imagination, that vision to operate the economy in a way that we industrialize, if it doesn't create the incentives for business to think beyond what they make money now, they will never do it on their own. The government has to protect the economy, the government has to support local business, the government has to support technology development and upgrading. Individual businesses will never do that, but because businesses do what businesses do, make it profitable for them to invest in industrial development. So I think even that second part that seems to be kind of passive, now we can't do anything because we're stuck in the rut, because that's the nature of the kind of business we have. Actually, the government can set the terms so that other businesses can prosper. The government can set the terms so Filipino industry can prosper. But will it have the political will and the imagination to do that? Well, I think that's another thing. Especially if the economic forces are actually in government as well.
So in light of that, while there are obstacles, but there are ways to overcome it. And then earlier, Roseby also was talking about directions, 3 directions. Like from the 3 political directions, like one was maintaining the drift, that was just drifting, status quo, drifting downward drift. The other was the intensifying political infighting, thus contributing to even more intensified economic crisis. And third, yung disruption in terms of like people's movement or mass movement pushing for complete change. Like, in your opinion, I know, it's like which one are we more leaning to? And I know, like, what is that? Or not we. I know what we are leaning to, but like in terms of the objective situation right now, Okay.
Actually, these are directions.
Okay.
These are scenarios, and there are prerequisites to each scenario. So if you notice, 1 and 2 will be scenarios where the people's movement will not act, diba? So if you ask me, where are we? Which scenario or direction are we taking? I think it's the more active scenario where the people struggles will push for that change. Now, and then we've been told, no, don't do that because it's going to disrupt the economy. Diba? Even impeachment. Impeachment is not yet even about people power. But if there is public pressure, then you know that impeachment will succeed, diba? Even impeachment now is just being, described by Malacanang as that's bad for the economy. And so that's when we say that no, people power is good for the economy. Political pressure is good for the economy because as we've been talking about, as the pahabol answer by Sunny is that there should be strong state intervention. But what we're seeing here is the state really favors the elite interests. So, the sovereignty really rests in us. And that's the scenario we are seeing. That is the direction we are pushing. So, did I answer your question?
Yes, that's almost like parting shots. I'm sorry. We'll get there. We'll get there
thank
soon.
you for
we'll come back there. Thank you for coming today. Sorry. Do you want to add to that, Sunny, or?
No, he doesn't want to commit to the scenario.
Oh, he doesn't want to commit to the scenario yet. We have to still see the developments. Even now, you mentioned, people are focused or seeing the government going after what they call the people responsible for the corruption scandal and all that stuff. But you mentioned that BBM is also a very big part of this systemic corruption at perpetuating that. But there's a sense that you were saying that he's kind of trying to separate himself from that he's not a part of that, but actually the one that's behind trying to unveil all this. Do you think that's the sentiment of the general public, or is that something that, needs to be discussed or talked about more? And how can that be in terms of unveiling that this is not just about a few people or a few contractors? I know that you mentioned here about bureaucrat capitalism and the whole system, but what is it that we can do more, discuss more to really unveil or expose how far up this goes?
Okay. For me personally, the most frustrating thing about what happened last year is it showed how cynical the government is about us. When President Marcos came out with the Mahiya naman kayo statement in the State of the Nation address, that was very clearly meant to portray himself as a reformer. Now, I think it was so deeply cynical because we can't forget that he had been on top of 3 consecutive budgets. And as Rosby mentioned, those 3 consecutive budgets literally had trillions of pesos in unprogrammed appropriations, trillions of pesos in infrastructure funds, and almost 1 trillion pesos in flood control projects. When you're talking about roughly 4 to 5 trillion pesos in funds being dispersed by the government, that's not an aberration. You need to use the government machinery to do that. So clearly, pork barrel funds were dispensed over the last 23 to 2025 budgets as a matter of policy. And that matter of policy was so brazenly put in the BBM formula of the DPWH. And that implementation of that policy, that's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to dispense hundreds of billions in pork barrel under the table. It was a matter of policy. It used government mechanisms. So when even the budget secretary preemptively resigned as to prevent that thread being pulled even more. I think that's so important to grasp because it's so cynical for the administration to try to control the narrative, to give us a few small and maybe medium-sized fish, and then let our anger subside, and then maintain its centralized control over pork barrel to carry it through until 2028. So I think it's so important right now. Honestly, everyone's so angry at the Dutertes. We should be. We're so angry at the human rights violations, the violence, the thievery under the last administration. That's all true. But this administration, the numbers will show that massive increase in official pork corruption-tainted funds that spiked in 2023 and 2024, only slightly moderate in 2025. That was a matter of policy by the Marcos administration. So between the two, who's actually more deserving of being held to account? We'd argue right now, it's so important to reframe the problem. If we reframe the problem as we have to see, can the political system reform itself from within? Can the political system reform itself from within with the pressure from the outside? If it's just Sara Duterte being impeached, that's reducing the impeachment to the factional squabble between the Marcos dynasty and the Duterte dynasty for 2028. But if we impeach the president, and there are very serious allegations, we don't know if it's going to be docketed and then taken up because the strategy in Congress right now is to kill the legitimate impeachment complaints. But it's so much more important because if you actually want any shred of thinking that it is possible to reform the system, it's not going to happen with impeachment and conviction of Sara Duterte. All that will prove is that the president's control remains so overpowering that he can wield his power over the House and the Senate to seal a conviction. But look at it the other way. If we get a conviction of the president, what does that show? That shows that the government's anti-corruption agencies are functioning and not built into the president. Because the DOJ can investigate, the NBI can investigate, AMLC can investigate, the ombudsman can investigate. If all these investigations produce evidence and reports of corruption involving the president, and if the evidence is so overwhelming, it passes the Justice Committee and it passes it's enough to convince the Senate to convict the president, there is no other way, I think, to imagine a real shake-up of the system and believing that Philippine politics can be better. So for me right now, it's so emblematic, not just symbolic, the practical relevance of the president being impeached, then all the constitutionally and statutorily mandated bodies cracking down hard, investigating properly to prove innocent. I mean, if he's innocent, edi good. If not, then he's accountable. If we want change in the political system, I'd argue that is what will give the impulse for political change in the system. That will show the system can respond to the people. That will show the system, despite the awful personalistic politics of the Philippines, can be overcome by the system. That will show that, yes, there is hope. But on the other hand, if this weird, we don't know, we will know on Monday or Tuesday, if this weird stratagem that the absence of the SecGen and ministerially they can't receive the complaint, so a weak complaint is referred to the justice, immunizing the president for 1 year. If that's successful on Monday, that's awful because that shows a system is closing ranks and then protecting the president. And that's the president indicating his control still because of the pork in the 2026 budget, asserting his control over Congress, over the House of Representatives. And again, my last point, it's so cynical for the president who's shown or well, who will be shown if the impeachment trial proceeds. The president, by his actions over the first 3 budgets, has shown the Marcos brand is equivalent to the worst corruption in Philippine history. The Marcos dictatorship, Guinness Book of World Records, so if that matters, that's a check. But the numbers show huge pork barrel, huge manipulation of funds, huge executive and legislative discretion over funds in the 2020-25 budget. Parang become full circle. So sana by February, the anniversary ng EDSA, we realize the Marcos brand is actually about the worst corruption in Philippine history. So, again, my frustration is this is a cynical manipulation by the government because they still control the budget, they still control so much of the House and the Senate. It's so cynical for them to throw us a few former senators, then maybe a couple of congressmen, representatives, or a few contractors, and then cynically wait until the next elections, because by the next elections, the pork barrel system will still be there. By the next elections, the dynasties will still be there. By the next elections, we will get the same outcomes we've been having for the last, 15, 16 elections since the dictatorship.
Thank you. Osby. I was told not to frown, so. Okay. So, okay na. All right. So I'm sure there are other people in the audience that want to also ask questions. So let's proceed to open the forum. As stated before, if you want to ask a question, you can either write this down on the bottom of your program and pass the paper to one of our staff members, or you could come up to one of the microphones to your left and to your right. Okay, we have someone coming up to the mic. I know, he's not coming up to the mic. Okay. Did somebody, Sir Kulex from Bunyog, part of it. Okay. Could you please state your name, organization?
Kulex Suliman po, Bunyog. Buwan malo na ako magtatanong. Ito pong nangyaring flood control, talagang nagalit naman yung taong bayan. Kaya lang, ang tanong ko po ganito. Sa tingin ko po, parang may gap. Yung ginawang flood control corruption kasi, hindi lang siya political abuse. Economic abuse siya. Ayun, kanina doon sa sinasabi ni Director Sani, sa budget natin, 12 billion lang yung nilaan para sa national industrialization. Napakaliit. Samantalang yung importansya ng economic reform ay kasing halaga ng political reform. Kaya lang sa tingin parang may gap na yung galit ng taong bayan sa ating mga kumokontra dyan sa korupsyon, parang nadidiinan yung political reform, kaya yung mga congressman, karoon din sila ng pakonte-konte, kahit pa rin political, anti-political dynasty, budget, pero hindi na-emphasize yung economic reform, kagaya halimbawa nung paglalaan, or pag-usapan natin yung national industrialization. Parang hindi na mainstream. Kasi lagi kami kumain ng Yvonne, ganyan ang sinasabi, no? Napakahalaga pala. Kagaya ng reforma sa politika, reforma din sa ekonomiya. So paano po kaya natin i-address yung gap na yan sa ating public discourse?
Let's see that it's not becoming popular.
Okay. Wala tayo kasi ganitong technology, no? Wala naman kasi tayo industrialization. Alright, paano i-address? Galing ako sa talk for the Union of the Senate Employees. No? And the similar question, sabi niya, is there a development planning happening sabi ko, well, actually po, there's a renaming from NEDA to the Department of Development. No? Pero yun, kahit sa amin, that's cynicism ano, you've been there all along. Your mandate is to plan for development. Pero ito lang masasabi ko, i-search nyo ang word na national industrialization in the past or even present Philippine development plans, and you will not find it. So practically, by development planning, the state has parang off the table na ang usapin ng pambansang industrialisasyon dahil ang kanyang paradigm naman is to attract foreign investments. So i-find search nyo ulit ang foreign investment, foreign capital, market-oriented, whatever, and wow, ang daming matches. So I think it will start from a state that's really developing. That's really planning for development and planning for industrialization. That will be broad-based, no? Parang yung pinakita sa atin, will be based on agrarian reform, will take care of people's welfare and people's rights. Dapat may ganun munang plano. Before we can really increase the discourse in lawmaking, that there should really be allocation for such. Ang nakikita kasi natin, the budget reflects the direction. The budget is pro-elite, the budget is anti-development, it's so anti-poor. So yun ang budget natin for the last 40 years. And austerity, no? It's a very technical term. Austerity talaga tayo, which means it's a neoliberal dictate na ibig sabihin lang niya is medyo bawas-bawasan mo yung social services mo dahil magbabayad ka pa ng utang at magpapatayo ka pa no, ng mga magagandang kalsada at mga tulay para sa foreign business or para sa export processing zones. So, if we have that kind of paradigm, I mean, not we, but the state, the Philippine government, then yung magiging crumbs lang talaga eh. Yung mga allocation for MSMEs, or magiging soft pork nga sila in a sense eh. Diba? Kasi dinidisburse yan sa kanilang mga distrito. And yes, we will be trapped in that kind of underdevelopment. So yeah, that's my agitated answer.
Did you also want to respond, Sunny? Okay. So before we proceed with other next questions, I would like to first call to be as reactors to the inputs earlier from the UP student Regent, Ron Dexter L. Clemente. Could you please stand up? And also the Public Relations Council of the UP Stat Student Council, Paul Samuel T. Manglindan. So this is okay. If we can have a microphone. Okay. Yes. Okay, go ahead. What do you reckon? Sorry. Pwede actually, would you like to also come up para it won't be awkward to...
Hello. Hello po, magandang hapon po sa ating lahat today. Ayan, muli, I am Dexter Clemente, the current student regent of the University of the Philippines system, no? And siguro in the discussion today reminds us of truth, no? That rapid economic growth does not mean progress for the Filipino people. Ayan, as Sir Sonny Africa clearly laid out earlier, no, the so-called growth of the economy is carried by household spending, no, not by the creation of decent, productive jobs. 2/3 of Filipino workers are trapped in low-paying service sector, while real production continues to decline. This explains why people are hungry, no, hindi dahil tamad sila, hindi dahil ayaw nilang magtrabaho, but because the economy itself refuses to provide dignified work. So for the youth, no, hindi po ito isang abstract na economic problem lamang. This is the reality that we are being trained into. Because we are told that education is the great equalizer, quote-unquote, but equalizer for what future yung tanong. No, students graduate into contractual work, underemployment, or migration. No, education, it is reduced to producing workers for an economy that cannot even absorb them. No? So in this system, schooling becomes preparation not for national development, but for survival only. No? This is why the question of industrialization raised today is also a question of education. No country has developed without building its own productive capacity. No? And yet, our education system remains detached from genuine national development instead of strengthening Filipino science, technology, agriculture, manufacturing. Yung education system natin, it is currently aligned with foreign labor markets and corporate demands. So what we are seeing currently is not simply an education crisis, kundi ay development crisis na nire-reflect inside our classrooms, inside our schools. So gaya din ng banggit ni Ma'am Rosario Guzman kanina sa discussion, yung political instability that we are experiencing today, the fractures within the ruling elite, yung collapse ng mga alliances, yung exposed corruption scandals dito sa Pilipinas, these are also not accidental. They are symptoms of a rotten system built on bureaucrat capitalism, as we have heard earlier, where public offices nagiging gateway siya para sa private accumulation. So corruption is not an exemption. It is also built into the budget. It requires approval from the highest officials in our country. And once again, education pa rin yung nagbabayad ng price nitong nangyayaring corruption na ito sa ating bansa. Despite claims of increased education funding, true education budget, quote-unquote, remains a myth. So when enrollment is considered, yung mga inflation, ganyan, learning shortages, when all these things are considered, the increases do not translate to meaningful change. Education continues to be treated as secondary behind infrastructure projects, debt servicing, and repression funding. Para sa amin, mga kabataan, and mga scholar ng bayan, ito ay isang direct political message from the state. Na ang aming kinabukasan is negotiable. Our future is negotiable, but the interests of the elite are not. So this is why frustration alone is not enough. The youth are not merely observers of crisis. We are called pag-asa ng bayan for a reason. Pero as of now, para maisakatuparan natin yung pagiging pag-asa ng bayan ng mga kabataan, kailangan maging doers din tayo of the present. So ayun, muli maraming salamat po doon sa mga naibahagi ng ating speakers. At tuloy-tuloy ang laban ng mga kabataan at ng mga scholar ng bayan.
Thank you. Thank you to UP Student Regent from Dexter Clemente. For our next reactor, please welcome Public Relations Counselor of the UP Stat Student Council, Paul Samuel Mangad Lindan.
Okay. So muli, ako po si Paul Samuel Mangalindan, ang Public Relations Counselor ng UP Stat SC. So, ayan, in-invite ako for a reaction, tapos, bilang, estadistiko kami ng bayan, we're statisticians, this talk is very close to our hearts and very, awesome para pakinggan namin. And bilang scholar estadistiko ng bayan din, sobrang na-appreciate namin kasi ang hirap po magsaliksik at mag-search ng mga data para sa lumalalang political climate. And when we look back sa topic ni Sir Sonny, makikita natin yung sobrang detailed na data and nakakalungkot. Sobrang nakakalungkot na pabagsak yung bayan natin. But I want to re-emphasize yung part na disruptive yung nature ng national industrialization. And mas lalo na sa country natin. And ayun, it makes sense dahil hindi na nila tinatago yung pamamaraan nila sa pagprotekta ng status quo, which is yung pamamasista, yung fascism. So, kaya naman pinapasista kaming mga advocates, activists, mga kabataan, mga estudyante, at mas lalo na rin po yung sa sektor ng mga magsasaka na nagpapanawagan lamang ng kailangan at karapatan natin na academic freedom, karapatan sa edukasyon, genuine land reform, and national industrialization. Pero beyond that, pinapakita rin ng data na hindi na kaya ng system na suportahan yung bureaucrat capitalism na pinapamalas ng nasa state. And bumabagsak na itong mga tactics nila. At ayun, yung datos din, ginagabayan din nito tayo para sa tunay na democracy. And ayun, binibigyan din tayo ng boses ng data na tama yung pinaglalaban natin, guys. Hindi to gawa-gawa lang ng mga eksperto. At ayun, kahit gaano man kalakas yung pamamasista, ay hindi na po tayo kawalan dahil nasa atin na po yung data, nasa atin na po ang datos, at ito ang magiging armas natin sa paglaban para sa ating kinabukasan na para sa masa of people economics. At kaya naman po, malinaw rin po yung paninindigan ng aming konseho na sandigan ang datos na makamasa, tutulan ang pamamasista ng Estado at padagundungin ang mga panawagan na palayain ang mga bilanggong politikal na tumunggali lamang sa kapalpakan ng pamamalakad ng mga nagdaang rehimen at sa tumitinding pagbagsak ng ekonomiya. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Paul Samuel of the UP Student Council. I believe our spokes would like to react or comment in return to our reactors.
Sige, sorry, na-trigger ako. Reactions to the actors. I think what was mentioned about bureaucrat capitalism is so important. Also put it against the depressing point of the economy in decline, but actually the profits of a few. To be very specific, actually I'm going to circle back into the first question of Audrey about what hinders industrialization. Bureaucrat capitalism and the oligarchs and the billionaires hinder industrialization. Why? If anyone noticed one of the charts earlier, among the rapidly rising sectors is utilities. Where are the billionaires getting so much of their money right now? From privatized utilities, privatized water, privatized power, privatized transport. Why would someone making money from these industries, these sectors, be worried about national industrialization? Because part of national industrialization is stopping this stupid monopoly pricing of power and water and transport. Actually, it should mean nationalization of these critical sectors. So if you're a billionaire, having all these franchises and contracts, why would you risk losing your businesses in all the billions in profits because the Philippines has a national industrialization plan? So the point that the reactor said that I'm reacting to, I think bureaucrat capitalism has to be understood in that broader sense. But also, the downfall of the economy, so the decline of the economy is the decline of the people's conditions, but it's matched by an improvement in the wealth and riches and businesses of those close to power. And the disruption we need will disrupt their sources of wealth and power. It will disrupt the monopoly utilities they have. It will disrupt their cheap sources of capital. Imagine if you're Manny Villar, you want cheap loans, but because the government has industrialization plan, the cheap loans go to industry where you have no skill set, but your skill set is in real estate development. Suddenly, your capital costs increase. So across the board, if you look at one by one where billionaires and oligarchs make money, they make money at the expense of national industrialization. And if we believe in any way that they will use their political power to implement a policy of national industrialization, that will never happen because they will never undercut their own profits, their own sources of wealth. So I think, again, how do we fix that? Well, they should be the government. So the government shouldn't be equated to them. The Leninist state equates them. But if you believe in a government that can stand for something better for the majority, that government, with the push by the people, will be able to press for policies that aren't afraid to challenge the entrenched interests of bureaucrat capitalists. Ibang kwento pa yung how foreign investors, foreign creditors benefit from us and will disbenefit from industrialization. That's another thread, pero sana you at least get the drift. Yeah.
Did you also want to?
To react to the reactor, just like to thank our youth for naming it what it is, fascism. I mean, we should talk about it. I mean, we're talking about bureaucratic capitalism, and it's coming. It's also coming from the two other evils, right? Imperialism and political dynasties making use of feudalism and all that. But the youth named it as it is. It's fascism. Whatever is arising, whatever kind of repression is arising from bureaucrat capitalism as we are witnessing it now, ay pasismo. Pasismo yan ng Estado. Well, before we were saying neoliberalism is fascism in disguise, but now it's not in disguise. It's very out in the open. So parang ganun lang. I mean, I was watching the parang indignation rally yesterday for Frenchie May, the conviction of Frenchie May and Tacloban 5. And then this youth leader was saying that magrevolusyon tayo o hindi, karahasan pa rin ang inihaharap sa atin. Diba? So I think that is not just a challenge, but it's a statement of reality among the youth. And I'm so happy, nasabihin nila that we are still, holding the torch for the future. Salamat.
Thank you. Sige po. So, opening the floor again. Yes. Or are you Googling what the answer to the next question is, Sunny? I'm just joking. So we have a written question that has come in. And we'll take this first. What happened? Sunny, what happened to the Maharlika Sovereign Fund? Remember you were talking so much about it in the past bird talks? Could this mechanism be used for national industrialization?
Yes. Okay. In all honesty, the reason national industrialization is so hard, because there's so many things to do. There's so many things to do across literally every realm of economic policy, including education. But one of the maybe major pillars of any industrialization effort is having financing, especially development financing, especially affordable credit for Filipino industry. So in principle, the Maharlika Fund, or a mechanism where the government gets funds and then invests in industries, that could be a mechanism for national industrialization. But can the Maharlika Fund as it is now function for that? Well, definitely not. Definitely not, because the government has no plan for national industrialization. So whatever that mechanism potentially can make, it's not going to get anywhere because there's no plan to begin with. What's it being used for now? Well, the last I heard publicly was that they are investing in mining. But that's kind of irrelevant right now. If the metric is, can the Maharlika Fund be used for national industrialization? In principle, yes. But you have to have a plan to begin with. Without that plan, Maharlika Fund will just be investing in what's profitable. And that's not what industrialization is about. A lot of industrial projects won't be profitable for years. That's why you need government funding. That's why you need cheap capital. But the way it's functioning now, the Maharlika Fund, they want to earn money. So actually, even the way it's designed right now, it's not actually functioning as a development fund. It will probably create profits because they'll have a hard time living down the reputational damage of the Maharlika name and brand of the Marcoses collapsing. But making money is not the same as industrialization. I think that's the key point. And the Maharlika Fund is just there to get returns, not development returns. Definitely not industrial development returns.
I think the last time that yung parang what can pass off as sovereign wealth, no, ay yung malampaya. Right. I mean, it's patrimonial asset. Atin yan. It's gas, it's energy. but we just gave it to a foreign corporation and to oligarchs, local oligarchs, to extract whatever natural resources we have there, and then the government was just asking for royalties. And then, of course, there's another intrigue, scandal there, that the royalties under the Arroyo administration were not even used for the budget or for development, whatever. So, it's the same eh. We have a fund, kinuha yan sa kung ano-anong mga, national funds or even, and then I think there was only one corporation na, okay, I'll add to the fund, and then using it to fund a big mining TNC or transnational corporation. So, yeah, it's in the purpose, but at the same time, it's also a means of plunder of not just natural resources, but of our resources, of public resources.
Thank you. For our next question, we will take one from the mic. If there's anyone that wishes to, sir, in the blue plaid t-shirt. Oh,
Magandang hapon po. Si Garcia ng Societrix. Yung una, mabuting na banggit yung sa NEDA, no? Na bago na pangalan ngayon. Kasi tingin ko, isa dapat sa tinatarget natin ng pagkilos at mga rally ay ang NEDA. Ito kasi yung, halimbawa, yung 6% na diretso ni Pinoy ng 6 na taon, walang kwenta yun. Kasi ang kailangan natin ay double-digit na growth rate kung gusto nating magkaroon talaga ng konting pakiramdam sa mga tao. Di bali na medyo mababang double-digit, basta double-digit. Pero yung 6, 7, 8%, walang mangyayari sa atin yan. Kasi yung populasyon natin, lumalaki pa rin. Yung isa sa mga dapat ipako sa krus ay si Balisacan. Kasi lagi siyang, hindi ko alam kung bakit ang iba't ibang administrasyon, paborito si Balisacan. Wala namang hindi tumutulong sa long-term planning ng kabuhayan. Hindi yung makukuha ng 6 na taon, tas bago na naman. Di ba? Hindi ko alam kung anong tinuturo sa School of Eco ng UP. Bakit ganyan si Balisacan? Pero yung unang gusto kong sabihin ay, mula 1972, ang kailangan sa Pilipinas ay revolusyon. Diba? Ganun lang kasimple yan, di ba? At ngayon, napakahina ng gobyerno, lalo na yung Pangulo mo. Gawin ba naman nating Pangulo yung nagbulakbol sa college? Di ba? Kaya kung makikita nyo, kahit kailan, ang makikita nyo sa TV mukha ni BBM, hindi alam ang gagawin. Di ba? Nalilito lagi. Kaya napakahina ng gobyerno ito, kasama nung pagsusuri ninyo na may iba-ibang krisis, hindi niya nalalampasan. Di ba? Ang problema ay, bakit yung napakahinang gobyerno, kahit napakahina ng gobyerno natin, ang mas malaking problema, napakahina ng ating progresibong lusan. Kaya sa akin, ang mas importanteng tanong, madaling ganun-ganunin yung kakulangan ng gobyerno at kasalukuyang kalagayan. Mukhang kailangan nating tanungin, bakit mahina tayo? Para baguhin yan at palitan yan. Natatandaan ko nung last year, nung present ng IBON, yung media nila, national industry. May state ang makabayan ng Senado. Pero kahit na isa ron ay walang nanalo. Ang ibig sabihin, itong ideya na to ay hindi pa tumatagos sa mga tao. At maraming mga lumitaw na pagsasaliksik na ang sinasabi ay ang kilusan, ang popular movements, malayo sa masa. Hindi natin nakakausap yung masa. Kasi, tingnan nyo yung DDS, hanggang ngayon, DDS pa rin. Di ba? So, ang tanong ko, sa inyong dalawa ay, sa palagay ninyo, bakit mahina tayo at anong dapat gawin?
Sige, thank you po. Sige po. Bakit mahina po tayo? At anong dapat gawin? sorry, but thank you po.
Hello. Sige. Ano ako, sponge eh. So, ang dami niyo pong nasabi na talagang inabsorb ko yun. Pero na-stuck ako dun kay Balisakan. So, actually, ano na lang ako, trivial story na lang ako. Alam niyo ba na nung 2 months ago, kailan ba yung Big Bold Reforms? Actually, he thought of big, bold measures. Siguro nasabihan siya, President, tigil-tigilan mo na yung kai-initial mo dyan. Ma-obvious na tayo na nagre-retorika. Alam niyo ba na yung ambisyon 2040 is actually Arsenio M. Balisacan. So, just to illustrate na yung mga ano natin, yung mga, ano ba tawag sa kanila, cabinet, whatever, secretary, ang secretarying hindi secretary until naging department, di ba? These are political appointees. And they carry on, no? Carry out din nila kung ano yung pagpapalakad nung nakaupo. Which is, sabi nga natin, basically, continuation talaga ng mga neoliberal policies, pro-elite, etc., pro-foreign, blah, blah, blah. So, dun sa tanong na ako actually disagree ako na 70s pa dapat nagrevolusyon eh. Di ba? I think as soon as the Americans captured our victory from the Democratic Revolution of 1898, as soon as yun, ano ka na. Di ba? Magre-reset ka na. And I believe the Filipino people have reset since then. So I don't believe in the premise na mahina tayo. So I cannot answer the question bakit tayo mahina. Because if you go around at least a region, we're still the most vibrant social movement I can see, the most vocal and the most organized. So I was in an international forum and they were comparing Indonesia and the Nepali and the Filipino youth. And then there is this Hong Konger, isang bata, and then she said na, yung sa inyo organized, no? And I said, yes. And I think that is a source of pride para sa akin. Because we worked hard for that. At yun nga, kaya balik uli ako dun sa mga youth reactors natin. Napapass on lagi yung torch from one generation to another ng mga revolutionary Filipinos.
Did you want to react to or...
Hindi ako magsasalita. Ako, hindi ko isipin mahina tayo. Walang duda, kumpara sa mga nasa poder, mas mahina tayo. Pero di ba yun ang point ng pag-revolusyon? Nag-revolusyon ka para palakasin yung puwersa, para pag-uwiin yung umiiral na kaayusan. So I think, kung magmumula tayo sa pag-isip, ay mahina tayo, at kung yung tono ay despair, medyo mali yun eh. Mas pangawakan ko una na banggit nyo, kailangan mag-revolusyon, at bahagi ng diwa ng pag-revolusyon, hindi mo isipin na mahina ka, kundi magpapalakas ka. Pag-aaralan mo yung bagay-bagay, kung may sabit, hindi mo gagawin yon. May matagumpay na bagay, uulitin mo yon. But I think yung creativity nun, mga galing sa mga tulad ng mga kabataan, but most of all, yung diwa niya, mas mahina tayo kumpara dun sa mas malakas. But like you said, yung revolutionary spirit, nagpapalakas tayo. So ako, I think, even that notion, yun ang delikado na tatanim sa utak na mahina tayo. We should never ever start from there. Kasi magmula tayo doon, talo lang talaga tayo. At hindi yung revolutionary sa akin.
We have our next question on the mic. Could you please introduce yourself? Tapos if you could keep it also short muna and direct to the point. Okay.
Good afternoon po. I'm Joel Ranoco from Don Bosco College, Canlubang. As you mentioned po, Sir Sonny, in your presentation earlier, there is a stagnant movement of unemployment since early 2000s. As young Filipino po, preparing to enter the workforce, what concrete changes should we expect or demand to ensure na we can earn living wages in the future po? Thank you.
Sorry. Alam mo, matagal na yung mga panawagan for nakabubuhay na sahod, yung tamang benepisyo, maayos sa workplace. So, ano yung dapat i-demand natin? Hindi nawawala yung mga demand na yon. And I think ultimately, hindi yan makukuha dun sa pakikipusat ng individual eh. Makukuha yon sa collective demand ng maraming manggagawa tulad mo, bumalain dun sa collective demand ng mga manggagawa tulad mo at ng mga union, at collective na demand ng mga manggagawa tulad mo, ng mga union, at ng mas malakas na kilos sa masa, na dinedemand talaga yon. Both as a matter of right sa workplace, but also as a matter of constitution and statutory right ayon dun sa batas. So, ano yung may expect natin? Well, ang may expect natin right now, ang direksyon, pabagsak talaga. Unfortunately, because hindi na asikaso yung pagpapahusay ng ekonomiya, madalang na makakuha ng formal na trabaho. Formal meaning sumusunod sa minimum wage law, may tamang benepisyo. Right now, hindi lalagpas to maybe 6 to at most 8 million workers lamang out of a 50 million workforce ang masasabi nasa formal private establishment, sakop ng mga wage laws na yon. Siguro, idagdag natin yung ilang mga kawani, but at most maybe 1.5, 2 million, at even yung mga kawani nga, hindi nasusundan yung mga karapatan nila. So, i-maximum mo 1 out of 5 workers na nasa formal establishments na potentially pwede i-demand yan. So, para sa akin, medyo madilim pakinggan yon, but I think 2 levels yung laban natin. Yung immediate level na laban doon, whatever establishment ang papasukan mo, make sure i-demand mo yon. Kung kaya mong buo ng union, magbuo ka ng union. Pag may union na, magpalakas, work with other mga unions. So, yun ang first level talaga na kailangan gawin. Pero yung next level on, for the long-term interest mo, dahil bata ka pa, siguro may ilang dekada ka pa pagkatrabaho. Kung ayaw mo stuck dun sa mababang kalidad ng trabaho o maobliga may ibang bansa, kailangan talaga yung mas higher level of demand talaga. Kailangan ng mas matinong gobyerno, kailangan gobyerno na may totoong vision at puso doon para sa Pilipino. Kailangan ng gobyerno, may imagination, isipin, hindi kailangan magkasya kung sa klase ng atrasado na ekonomiya meron natin, kundi pwede actually magpatupad ng mas something more that the Filipinos deserve. And I think yun nga, as long as medyo may malayo tanaw natin, huwag tayong magkasya dun sa nakita natin ngayon, basta malayo tanaw natin, that's the only way actually to keep going forward. And I'm sure, ingit nga ako sa'yo, yung mga bata mas may energy kaysa kay Rosby. Si Rosby, nagpapanggap na bata yan, di ba? Sa mga input niya kanina, matandaan na rin yan eh. So, I think yung center of gravity, lumilipat sa kabataan. Kalahati ng Philippine population is under 26. So, ito next 5 years to 10 years, kung maghahanap tayo ng critical mass ng pagbabago, nasa kabataan. Kung maghahanap tayo ng critical na laban para sa pagbabago, nandiyan ang halalan. Pero more than that, yung araw-araw na laban between halalan, yun ang magpapanalo actually ng mga demands natin.
Thank you. Alam mo, huwag ka maniwala, Joyce. Yes, nag-agree ako kay Sunny, pero you know what? Yung critical thinking will start ngayon. Na-assert natin yun. We assert academic freedom, critical thinking, we ask questions sa ating mga guro. Kasi yun yung nagde-develop, no, ng isang bata na kapag pinag-graduate mo, ay magko-commit na baguhin niya yung sistema. Because if we continue na parang sinispoon-feed lang sa atin yung lessons, tapos naka-look forward na lang tayo sa pag-graduate para makapagtrabaho, we just repeat, no? Na-generate lang natin yung underdevelopment, yung kawalan ng critical thought, at kawalan, no, ng yung siguro inaano rin ni Sir na revolutionary spirit. So ngayon pa lang, magtanong ka na ng magtanong sa teacher, no? Hanggang makulitan siya sa'yo. So anyway, I'm sure the curriculum sa school mo is towards that. It's known din naman. Pero sana ay gumagamit din kayo ng IBON textbooks.
Sige, thank you. Our next question on the mic, please.
Good afternoon po to everyone. I'm Ansam Habines po from Kabataan Party List ATM chapter and concerned consumers and citizen of San Jose del Monte. And since we are talking about revolutionary spirit right now, and that gives me since okay. Ayan po. Since we believe that revolution starts with the mind, and we are all aware about the social injustices and issues arising in our country right now. Pero since po may data na ni-release last January 16 yung EDCOM na 0.4% nga lang din po yung functional literate sa aming mga kabataan ngayon, na kung iti-turn po natin yon into data, 4 in every 1,000 students lang po yung nakakaintindi na kung ano pinabasa nila. And given the fact na ang pina-fight po natin is the deceit and disinformation na nagpe-prevail ngayon, how do we give values on the data and the factual things na kailangan nating ibigay and educate sa mga kabataan to gain their interest? Kasi po, ayun nga po, when we present data to the people, ang boring para sa kanila. Ang pangit ng approach, ang pangit ng method. And tawag dito, when we apply it in a pedagogical approach na nag-serve sa interest nila, doon natin sila ma-hook. But how do we give value onto it? And ayun din, siguro observation na bakit nagpe-prevail yung disinformation, because the narrative and the propaganda ay doon lang lapat sa anong kaya nilang i-comprehend. So paano natin iaangat yung antas ng diskurso sa kung saan mabibigyan natin ng value yung data na pinipresent natin. Yan lang po, salamat.
Thank you.
Si Ross yung papalalim. Hindi namin alam sa ibon. 48 years old na yung ibon. Magdadalawang dekada na ako, mag-4 na dekada na si Rosby sa ibon. Ako pagtulungan natin. Alam namin na yung datos ay nandyan. Alam namin yung pagsusuri na marami sa datos, including sa gobyerno, ay mali. At alam namin ang sobrang susi, mas marami makaalam ng katotohanan. But again, to be candid, hindi namin alam. Yung average age sa ibon, lalaglag ko na yung makasama ko, 45, oo. 45, okay? Average nga, okay? So, I think, medyo, ang hirap na mag-isip na makabagong pamamaraan at 45, lalo na hindi namin kabisado yung medium, hindi namin kabisado yung humor, hindi namin kabisado yung visual language, at even yung pananalita. So ako, wala akong sagot doon, pero sana pagtulungan natin. At yung ibon talaga, medyo marami ng mga kabataan naman dito, super gusto namin pagtulungan ito. Wala kaming kakayanan, kayong mga kabataan, matutulungan nyo kami. So, ang dami namin datos, ang lalaki ng mga hard drive namin, ang mura-mura ng memory ngayon, pero yung pamamaraan, please, tulungan nyo kami. At very welcome talaga yon.
Hello. Okay. Sa department ko, hindi sinama. ang isang ano namin, yung parang beginning kang researcher. Ang lagi naming kumbaga endeavor o inspiration is you widen the literature. Laparan mo yung related literature. Pag lumapit ka sa akin, tapos dyaryo yung source, so laparan mo. Ngayon, actually, ang challenge sa amin yung AI . Kasi yung AI, ang dami niyang lurler, di ba? This is your silent partner, pero ang ingay, di ba? So, ang encouragement din namin, yes, you can Google, not through the AI, kasi yung Google has a website that you can explore. Pero in the end, lahat ng researchers sa IBON are encouraged to go out of the office. And that's the only way na ma-appreciate niya yung data when she is employing the people's research methods, the primary methods. Kaya pagbalik niya, mas gets na niya kung ano yung stats. So I think that's one level of appreciation sa datos. The data, to use a researcher's language, has to be triangulated. So, nakuha mo siya sa isang government agency, edi puntahan mo yung community. You can verify it using two methods. Pwede kang mag-focus group discussion. Pwede ka rin mag-interview. But never rely on one data alone, na secondary data or desk research, because you will never appreciate the data. You have to go out to the community, to the people, to validate it. So, akala kasi nila yung ibon, ganyan, yung parang si Sunny, yung graphiliac. Graphiliac loves graphs. While your audience is graphobic. Pero yung ganun kasi, hindi niya yun maipapaliwanag kung hindi niya yun na-verify. Hindi lang yun kasi, it's a macro, no? Macroeconomy siya, but you have to verify it in many other methods. And I think sa kabataan ganun be inquisitive, humanap ng malawak na review of related literature. Yan. Huwag kang mag-learner, huwag nang may ideology ka na, tas isoswak mo na lang yung datos mo. That is cheating.
Sige, thank you. Thank you for those questions. We have a written question first before we return to the mic for the next question. Are we ready for a new people power? At ano ang pwedeng gawin before 2028 elections? Are we ready?
Yeah.
Mag-anniversary sa
Okay.
Fed.
I think that's one example of seeing the forest for the trees. Of course, it's important to focus on particular moments. EDSA 40, or a new people power uprising, or the midterm elections 2025, or national elections 2028. I mean, they're there. But I think we have to reframe it. It's not just about winning elections. It's not just about victorious people's uprising in EDSA. I think we have to reframe it kasi it's not easy to change society. It's not easy to change the country's politics or economy. So I think, akin personally, which I don't practice because I'm such a fat slob, we should be marathoners. Our orientation should be, we have to become marathoners, training every day or training frequently, because we want to be marathoners. Because changing society is a marathon talaga. Now, once in a while, there's a Tokyo Marathon. Once in a while, there's London Marathon or something. But those are moments lang. So what's more important? Winning that one race or being a marathoner? I think we should be marathoners. And to be a marathoner, it's about the super, super steady, painstaking work of, as we said, thinking, analyzing, educating ourselves and others, organizing, so that when the Tokyo Marathon comes along, or the 2028 elections, we can fight and win it. But after that, we keep doing our marathon training because we're marathoners, and then if there's a moment for people power uprising, then we fight a people power uprising. But most important talaga, we have to build we have to be marathoners, build the effort on a daily basis. And I think that is most of all what will make us prepared for the 28 elections. That will most of all make us prepared for people power uprising. Hindi yung laban ay yung moment na yon. Yung laban ay lahat tayo sa araw-araw, palakasin natin. And I think yun ang mag-create ng conditions to make us and the country ready for a people power uprising that actually will have at its end better change for the country.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that question. So may we go to the mic for our next question.
Good afternoon po. Ako po si Gerson mula po sa Bahaghari. At yung tanong ko po ay, sa matagal na panahon ay tinatry doon ng ating gobyerno ang manggagawang Pilipino. Umaabot na sa punto, sa lala ng krisis ng malakolonyal at malapidal na sistemang panlipunan, na lumalaki at lumalawak yung balon ng informal economy natin. Kaya dumadami yung mga informal workers. Particularly yung tanong na ito ay para din sa mga organizers na sa ngayon kasi isa din sa mga tasks natin sa urban mass movement ang pag-organize sa hanin ng mga informal workers. Ngayon sa discussion po ni Sir Sunny regarding sa national industrialization, given the current state of the workers na mas maraming ang informal sa ngayon at mas preference din talaga nila ang pagiging bahagi ng informal economy, how can we convince or how can we raise the discussion amongst informal workers that they should be a part or that they should support national industrialization as a national program? Kasi po yung binalikan ko po yung slide, ang binabanggit po doon ay yung protection, social services, and kahit din po yung protection po sa workplace. Pero given na yung informal workers, wala silang per se na workplace talaga dahil sa informal na katangian ng kanilang trabaho. Paano po natin mapapayakap sa kanila ang programa para sa pambansang industrialisasyon? Yun lamang po.
Thank you.
Ang hirap ang tanong. Grabe talaga yung problema ng informals. So, may 3 points ako to stress how problematic an economy that has so many informals is. Right now, by IBON's estimates, about 8 out of 10 of workers are informals. That means irregular pay, low pay, irregular work, uncertain work. Second point, because 80% of the economy are informals, including wage earners who don't know if they'll be having a wage work in the next week or in the next month. Did you know employment in the country right now on a month-to-month basis sometimes goes up 2.5 million, sometimes drops by 2.5 million. Sa agriculture sector. Employment as a whole, sometimes on a month-to-month basis compared to how it was, employment can biglang jump up by 1.5 million, and the next month fall by 1.5 million. So it's quantified how incredibly volatile work is. There are people, it's a revolving door. You don't know if you will have work the next week. Third, inflation is slow, yeah, slower, but inflation isn't felt because people don't have decent work and decent pay. So I think every informal worker will know those 3 problems about massive informality, the volatility of work, insufficiency of pay. Alam nila yan. So how can they be convinced about industrialization? Industrialization is the exact opposite of that. Because, halimbawa, setting up a karinderya or setting up a sari-sari store. No effort siya or low effort involved. Low capital, low effort, but also super volatility in earnings. But setting up a factory, high capital, high effort, high technology, but more consistency. You can't have workers going in and out of a factory. So conceptually, what's the best way to convince a worker that they need industry? Tingnan mo lamang how stable work is in most factories. Just look at how regular pay, stable pay, comes from formal work. And that kind of formal work will only come from an industrialized economy. So conceptually, nandun yun eh. And I think every informal worker who looks at a factory or an office that has formality regular pay, the promise will be, hindi lang yan para sa iilan na 6 to 7 million formal workers right now. We want 50 million Filipinos to have that kind of work right now that only 6 million workers in private establishments have. So conceptually, ganun yun. Paano ipapaliwanag ko na on a more practical level? Hindi ko alam. But I think, yun nga, ang super danger ng informal work, ang tinuro sa mga Pilipino, sariling kayod, sariling sikap, mag-cash na lang to what's available. grabe yun. Kung ganoon talaga yung pag-iisip, ang maging tendency, out of desperation, i-reduce mo yung problem as I have to work harder lamang. So siguro sa akin, kailangan bakahin yung ganung klaseng pag-iisip na it's not just about you, it's not about just yung personal survival, yung collective survival, lahat ng mga informals, kailangan na mas mataas na pangarap. Pero conceptual lang yun. Kung paano siya mapaliwanag, isama mo ako siguro sa isang kwarto for 3 months with informals, baka may isip ako. Pero right now, yun lang. Rosby, baka meron.
Ako tingin ko masasagot yung tanong, hindi sa economic restructuring, nasa politika siya. Oo, kasi ang problema kasi natin noon when we were realizing na dumadaos-dos yung union membership, lumiliit na yung wage and salary, lumalaki na yung self-employed and informal. Ang initial problem natin na paano tayo mag-oorganisa? Right? So I think mahaba yung pinagdaanan natin sa ganung dilema, hindi lang sa mga organizers, kundi doon sa mga kapatid na manggagawa na meron pang formality yung kanilang employment. Ang naging sagot natin noon, and this is like 3 decades ago, ay lumubog sa community. Okay. So gusto kong paniwalaan na yung paglubog na yon ay meron ding development sa pag-iisip na yung informal, yung self-employed o yung tindera ay hindi lang yung sarili niyang economy ang iniisip niya. So I think that's the only way we can convince them by showing them that NI is a collective endeavor. So collective, mass collective yon, ganon. And then habang sumasagot si Sunny, naalala ko yung mga panahon ng sakada. So yung sakada, totally wala na yan sa land. Agricultural worker yan. May pagka-informal yan kasi seasonal siya eh. Pero yung laban ng sakada na ipinakita ng kasaysayan sa atin, ipinaglaban niya ang agrarian reform kahit hindi naman niya naiisip na mabibigyan siya ng parcel of land. Bakit? Kasi nakita niya yung bigger collective eh. And the bigger collective is agrarian development. It's rural development. At ngayon, pag iniisip ko, hindi lang sakada ngayon yan, nandyan din yung usapin ng mga organized na informals, the urban poor. They look at the whole development perspective na hindi lang yung pabahay yung iniisip nila, di ba? Tinitingnan nila yon ng isang matinong ekonomiya that will give them permanent jobs and permanent incomes and decent living. So, kasama rin nila yung mga nagtataguyod o nag-advocate ng pambansang industrialisasyon. So, sa akin kasi parang pwede namang banggitin na, wag nating banggitin ng NI, pero kunyari, kausap ko yung bike mechanic sa isang talyer at sabihin kong, wala kang tools, wala pang parts, wala pa eh. Ang hirap talaga pag wala tayong industriya, no? I mean, it's really education. It's political education.
Thank you. Sige, we have a few more questions from the mic. We have the last, I believe this side first muna. Yung si Sir, if you could introduce yourself and then we'll go back and forth. Thank you.
So I'm Lawrence po from PUP Manila. So yung question ko po is, how can we endorse or educate people about a political reset without ever being tagged as a radical? Because as we all know nga, mga kabataan and yung mga aktivista ay na-red tag or na-aresto. So nalulunod na lang yung idea of na totoong pagbabago. Every time we ever go to the streets demanding for change because yung, how can I say this, yung normalization of red tagging culture. Yun lang po. Thank you.
Ako personally, I think one of the most insidious effects of red tagging, public vilification since the Duterte administration, and then building up a lot of legal attacks to give the pretense of legality to the attacks. One of the most insidious effects is that it's making people self-censor. And that's the worst thing that can happen. If we self-censor, that actually means we're actually delimiting the actions we do, that also means we're preventing others from knowing what needs to be done. And if we ourselves are scared to take radical steps, that's what red tagging vilification has done. It has diminished, it has destroyed, it has sort of vilified being radical, wanting change as something wrong. So I think coming from that, I think my personal analysis that we're self-censoring too much, I think we should assert. And there's no other way, because it's insidious, because the more we self-censor, the more we fear making radical demands, the more we are worried that we might be isolated. Actually, that's the battle won for those who want us to be silent, who are afraid of change, who are afraid of radicalism. So, of course, we have to fix the language, of course. I mean, it matters. But language is one thing, form is one thing, content is the other. We should never let up with delivering the most radical content possible in the most effective form and language to the audience we have. But I think in itself, it shouldn't be a consideration. We should work around it. But the red line to red tagging is when we're censoring ourselves. When we feel that happening, I think we should fight hard to overcome that. Sa akin.
Alright, sige. Thank you, San.
I think yun na yun. Makibaka, wag matakot.
We'll go first to this side for the next question. Okay, and then you'll be our last question.
Good afternoon po, Joy Serafon, President of Negosyo Advocates. So we are a network of business people, associations, cooperatives, like-minded individuals. We actually promote economic patriotism and national industrialization. My question is, in business per se, we actually look at two groups, the micro, small, medium enterprises, and on the other hand, there are also the big businesses, corporations leaning to bureaucrat capitalists. In our effort to organize these business people, where both of them, talents and resources, are important towards national industrialization, how is it best to explain to them, say, the impact of corruption, to better, as I have said, to in our effort to organize all these business people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, I think all business folks know about corruption. I think the difference is the biggest businesses use corruption as their competitive advantage. The small businesses who don't have the same power are at the receiving end of bad corruption. So I think it's important to layer it that way, because no joke, anyone here who knows anyone in a big corporation, ask them, they know how corruption the biggest corporations engage in to maintain their profits. Of course, some use the excuse that, yeah, but our competitor is also corrupt, therefore to keep up, we have to be corrupt as well. The point being, for the biggest corporations that have the most wherewithal and the biggest interests, they are actually part of that system of corruption. And that's why it's so hard to para bunutin yung tig ng corruption, kasi at the very highest level, that's a strong integration between corrupt private profit-seeking businesses and the government. Having said that, maganda yon, kasi if it's a smaller businesses who don't have the same capacity, definitely they are the receiving end of corruption. Sila yung kinokotongan, sila yung have problems with bad infrastructure, have problems tapping maybe government credit windows, facilities, etc. So actually, I think for small businesses, it's so easy to explain corruption because they will know the problem. They know they're facing black market taxation, underground taxation through Koto. They know that they're facing cheaper products because it's smuggled, because someone's scrapped in the customs department, etc., etc. So actually, I don't think there's a problem with explaining corruption to MSMEs, because ask any MSMEs naman, they will know, they will have a litany of corruption from the regulatory agencies to the local government units to actually what they see as a matter of national policy. So I don't think that's going to be a big problem. I think the bigger challenge for MSMEs is because every business survives on profits. The bigger problem, I think, to bring MSMEs towards national industrialization is convincing them that they have to support the political change and take a political stand for the political decision to be made to have industrialization policy. Because without that policy in place, no MSME will ever be a successful manufacturer. It's completely impossible talaga. And I think that's where parang the negative feedback loop lies. MSMEs are the receiving end of corruption by government, but at the same time, any industrial aspirations are bounded and dependent on the government creating the conditions, incentivizing industrialization. So I think that sort of negative feedback loop is a bit hard to overcome, but I think in the end, it boils down to two things. One, a business that actually has aspirations to industrialize, not just to make profits for themselves, but to help create an industrial base for the economy. But secondly, that same business having some kind of political optimism that the government can be pressured to implement industrial policy. And it's so important for the government to have an industrialization policy because without that, whatever aspirations anyone has, it's going to talaga, mababahuro lang talaga yun.
Hindi, sabi ko kasi, ano ba, corruption ba o bureaucrat capitalism? Pero I'll just add na lang na yung ease of doing business, all this good governance mantra that dictated on us by the World Bank or even, the multilateral lending institutions, na dapat good governance ka. It's about liberalism. It's about liberalization. So, ibig sabihin, wag ka nang kumotong sa gustong magnegosyo. It's just to facilitate the business, the business. Ang problema sa ease of doing business is for big corporations. The problem with small businesses is, bago pa sila makapagnegosyo, kung ano-ano rin yung idinidictate sa kanila. For instance, if you have 500,000 capitalization, halos pareho na yung tax na babayaran mo doon sa medium scale enterprise. So, things like that. No? Hindi ko na nasundan din kung paano in-adjust ito sa trade. So, yung small business, para makapagnegosyo siya at hindi siya buwisan ng kasing laki nung malaking may capitalization, victim siya nung under the table. Yun lang yung naiisip ko kahit sa mga pag-apply mo ng regulatory compliance, tayo tayo. Slip. Wala kaming business na, wala na, sarado na. Hindi kasi kayo nagsasubscribe Hindi. Recently kasi, sabi sa amin ng admin officer namin, naku, meron tayong parang risk, natatak. And that is because you're a small NGO, you're in the commercial area, etc. Nakapagkwentuhan naman na tayo about that, right? Meron kang building, ganun-ganon, blah! Pero sa totoo lang, kasi ikaw yung kayang-kaya nilang, I'm not talking badly about the Quezon City government, pero in general, in the national government, di ba, ganun yung nagiging impact ng corruption dun sa mga maliliit na negosyante. At yun, at sa halip na, I think this is the easiest answer, na ma-allocate sa kanila yung budget for their protection and for their, actually subsidy ang hinihingi natin sa government. That they are subsidized so they will not be gobbled up or go bankrupt in competition with the big businesses. Wala yun Wala yun. Matagal pinaglaban ni Teddy Casino yan sa Congress, pero di ba, hindi inabot yung ganung klaseng malaking alokasyon para sa maliliit na negosyante. So yun. Kaya nakakagalit pag nalaman mo lang na tinurakot siya.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have one more, our last question on the floor before we go to our
Hello. I'm Dennis po from P Manila. Hello. I'm afraid po dito is na-answer na, but aside from political reset and from advocating or pushing for considering formal businesses, given the recent decline of those investments and yung mga shift ng budgets natin given yung recent pork barrels and corruptions, how do you think, or do you think national industrialization can be adopted or observed, specifically or especially that funding is very essential for this to happen po?
Yung national industrialization, Philippine industrialization will always be possible. It will never be easy. It could get more and more difficult, like in the current environment, but it will always be possible. So, usapin ng funding. Right now, I think the Philippine financial system has about 19, 20 trillion pesos sloshing about there. A lot of that is invested in the current kinds of enterprises we have. A lot of it is also invested in mga securities, not earning. So, is there capital for industrialization? Pwede naman konti, pwede marami. Mas maganda kung mas marami, pero meron. So, walang duda, there is enough capital, finance in the economy right now as to build on industrialization. Is it enough? It will never be enough. Is it insufficient? Hindi. As long as there is, that's something to start with. So I think, bottom line, there are financial resources in the economy. There's so much wealth. Hindi nga, just the 3,000 richest billionaires. They have wealth, of course, in finance and in their stocks worth 8 trillion pesos. That's just 3,000 billionaires. Dagdag mo pa dyan, the government has able to spend now 6.7 trillion pesos, etc., etc. So there's finances in the Philippines. The only thing lacking is the government to say there's so much finance and capital around, using its control over the financial monetary system. Ang kulang lamang of the government to say that can't just go to where it's making money. That money has to go to building Filipino industry. When that choice is made, mechanisms will be created. Something like the Maharlika Fund, the Development Bank's mandate can be fixed, the Land Bank's mandate can be fixed, etc., etc. The mechanisms can be created, pero ang kulang, hindi yung finances, ang kulang, hindi yung ideas how to create the mechanisms, ang kulang, the political decision and the vision to believe in and work for national industrialization. So pwede talaga. I mean, ano yan, it's no reason not to do industrialization starting now. And if you don't do it starting now, it's not going to get any easier. It's probably going to get even harder pa nga.
Hindi ko na alam yung figures, pero is it about 65% or 70% of capital na circulating in the economies with the private financial institutions? And did you know that there is a law that says 15% of the assets of the financial private banks should be lent to industries and agriculture? And year in, year out, pag nagre-report na ang mga bangko sa BSP, only 1 or 2% ng kanilang financial assets are lent to these productive sectors. Pero walang nangyayari, no? That the government is not penalizing the banks. The government, kasi sa law, no, by may penalty yan eh. Whether increase mo yung reserve mo or next time doblehin mo yung pautang mo sa agriculture at saka sa industries. But every year in, year out, hindi naman napipenalize yun. So the law, wala siyang ngipin. It was parang patronizing lang sa agri-agralo yun, di ba? And sa industries. And it's huge, no? Ang laki ng rekurso. That's just there with the banks and with the oligarchs and with their rent-seeking industries like utilities, real estate, etc. So yung palang meron na. Pagka kinompute nyo nga, hindi nyo maiisipan mangutang for industrialization. Hindi nyo maiisipan. Pag kinompute nyo rin at itataas pa yung requirement for these banks to invest in industrialization, baka hindi nyo rin maisipan ang dayuhang pamumuhunan. So the money is there. Of course, and Sunny mentioned already that, you know, the rich and the billionaires are not taxed properly. Yung taxes pa lang of the billionaires nung kinompute natin, pwedeng hindi na kayo magbayad ng VAT o ng consumption taxes. May sukli pa yon para sa industrialization.
36 trillion pesos ang meron sa Philippine financial system. Wow. Yun lang nga. Umikot lang yan para kumita, hindi to industrialize. So imagine a government deciding, let's tap some of that 36 trillion pesos to develop Philippine industry. Mapabuelo talaga yan. So lack of finances are not a constraint sa atin.
That's how it's being used. Sige pa. So that's all the time we have for our open forum. So before we go to our parting shots from our two spokes, please stay for a little bit longer. We just have a few more announcements, and we also have want to take a class picture, a panoramic shot, if that's okay with you. So just bear with us a little bit longer. Parting shots, please, Roseby or Sunny, whichever you want to go first.
Ako, only parting shot ko, ang dami-daming kailangan gawin sa economy, but we'll be hitting our heads, bumping our heads against a wall to think na makukuha yan sa maayos pakipag-usap sa gobyerno. Right now, I think the most critical political question is, will the political system reform? Can it reform? Kasi if it shows that it can't reform on its own account right now in 2026, that means the challenge is for us to keep pushing for that system to reform. Impeachment isang laban lamang yan. Corruption cases ilang laban lamang yan. Yung bigger laban talaga is palakasin natin yung boses natin, yung pagkilos natin to show na hindi tayo magkakasya to what the system is giving us. And I think once mabago yung political leadership natin, once mabago yung political system natin, sa totoo lang, doon lang pwede ipatupad, doon lang mangyayari yung pangarap na umunad na ekonomiya to industrialization and all the other things. So, huwag natin bitiwan yon. We have to take the long view. Marathon talaga siya. Huwag tayo mag-fixate on particular na mga races. Mag-fixate tayo dun sa pagpapalakas ng ating pagkilos.
Thank you, Sunny.
Bittersweet. Nalungkot ako kasi dun sa sinabi ni Sunny kanina na sa Monday or Tuesday, malalaman na natin kung ano yung direction ng ating political situation. Kasi hindi tinanggap yung mga impeachment, ganyan, absent si Solgen, mga ganyan. SecGen. So, sa first week of January, there was an SWS survey saying that the Filipinos are optimistic. Optimistic. It's a Filipino culture. It's human nature. January, after the revelry, ang saya-saya nyo, ganyan. January 3, binomba ang Venezuela. So sabi ng mga tao, okay, back to business as usual, ganon. Pero I tell you this, the Filipino also has a culture that the first quarter of the year is a quarter of political upheavals. First quarter storm, EDSA 1, EDSA 2. And the question on whether are we ready for a people power, also like running a marathon, how do I run faster? You just run faster. Yun lang.
Thank you, Sunny. Thank you, Roseby. Sige po. Aside from thanking our two speakers today, thank you so much. Just want to thank again our co-presenters, which is the Office of the Faculty Regent, the Office of the Student Regent, all UP Academic Employees Union, and the UP School of Statistics Student Council, and our official media partner, Altermidya, as well as all our other partners who have helped in bringing Bird Talk to a greater audience and supporting our efforts today. But before we leave, I know you guys are itching to go out and have your merienda. I'm just kidding. My merienda outside, by the way. Okay, I just have a few announcements. The Water for the People Network will be holding a media briefing on water privatization next Friday, January 30, 10 a.m. Please wait for further details on the venue. Next, the latest IBON textbooks are still out, particularly for Makabansa grades 1 to 3 and for Araling Panlipunan and Social Study grades 4 and 7. These textbooks critically apply the DepEd's enhanced K-10 curriculum, formerly known as Matatag. The IBON 2026 planner is still available, carrying the theme of national industrialization and featuring the artwork of award-winning illustrator and peasant advocate Ara Villena. Yay! Also, IBON is proud to unveil its latest research publications, Pagpupunla or Sowing, and Pagpupunyagi or Perseverance, that feature stories of community farming and urban gardening, as well as barriers and pathways scaling agroecology to address climate change, the Philippine case. As well as Urban Stories Chapter 2, Resurgence. Thank you for that reminder. And next, for orders, right here, that's chapter 1 pala. For orders and inquiries, you may approach our book stand by the entrance or contact the IBON Bookshop online or visit us at 1140 Timog Avenue, Quezon City. IBON products are also available on Shopee and Lazada. And the IBON Partnership in Education for Development also invites teachers and academe to join EFD, or the Educators for Development. EFD is a voluntary association of educators committed to social transformation. You may approach the registration table for more information. And please don't forget to visit the official IBON website, as well as follow us online. And you can visit us at ourbeacons.ai or scan this QR code here if you would like to follow IBON on our various social media platforms. So that's all for announcements. Thank you again to our co-presenters, our official media partner, and as well as our partners that have helped promote IBON and IBON Birdtalk. So let's now take our class picture. Class picture. Where do we, somebody's gonna take up, nasa baba. Sa edge. Okay, Okay.
Yan, parang concert ba? Ayan, gusto mo ng yang, di ba?
Pares na.
Thank you again to all our audience for joining us today. We really appreciate your participation, and see you at the next IBON activity or next Bird Talk. Thank you po. Until next time. There's merienda and snacks in the lobby. Thank you po.
Translates to 2.25 million jobless Filipinos.
With higher food prices exerting upward pressure already above the government's own
Taon na pork sa panukalang budget para sa susunod na taon.
$15 billion on anti-flooding infrastructure.
An impeachment complaint against President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. filed and endorsed.
With Sunny po.